that. In October, the International Air Transport Association, a trade body representing airlines, approved a target of achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To achieve that, many airlines in the US and Europe are looking to buy sustainable aviation fuel made from renewable sources like used vegetable oil. Initiatives like these are pushing plane makers to come up with some radical new aircraft that will eventually cater to our growing appetite for travel without hurting the environment. We took a look at how Airbus, the world's #2 aircraft manufacturer, is stepping up to the challenge.
How long until we can fly emission-free? Airbus says it's more confident by the day it can be done by its 2035 target. Airbus's CEO spoke about its ambitions for hydrogen-powered planes at the company's summit in France.
The physics works. Hydrogen technologies are not new. They are used in other sectors. We use them in space on our rockets, and we don't need the laws of physics to change to be able to use hydrogen on our planes. So every day we become more confident, but we think we need to have a plane, we need to have the right fuels, the hydrogen available in the right quantity at the right place at the right time, and we need the regulations to be ready. So we really need the work and the collaboration of many people around the globe to make it happen on time.
But it could be a long wait until green passenger jets go mainstream. Larger aircraft with more than 150 seats are not expected to feature globally until about 2050. That means manufacturers and airlines today are under growing pressure to ramp up short-term innovations to cut their carbon. In the long term, meeting the ambitious plans for so-called green hydrogen means building a giant industry almost from scratch. To make that happen, British airline EasyJet is among those saying governments need to get involved and fast. Aviation's emissions over the last 3 decades leading up to the pandemic grew by about 80% to over 1 gigaton, and that's projected to double by 2050. According to Bloomberg NEF, about half of the airlines with the largest global market share have set net zero targets by that same date, nearly 3 decades away.
Coming up, from blue sky projects to the bottom line. We'll speak with our Bloomberg NEF expert Meredith Annex and dig into their models about how hydrogen fits into the future energy mix. This is Bloomberg Green. From Bloomberg's world headquarters in New York, I'm Kaylee Lyons, and this is Bloomberg Green. Now let's bring in Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist, to talk more about how hydrogen could change the energy landscape. So Meredith, what place do you think hydrogen is likely to have in the future energy mix globally?
Hydrogen's this incredible solution for us as we look to decarbonize because it's a perfect solution in areas that are hard to electrify. So where we like to think about hydrogen playing a role, it's in things like heavy industry, especially where you need a feedstock as well as energy source, and in things like dispatchable power, long-haul transport, maybe even shipping and aviation.
That sounds great that it can be used for such diverse industries. At the end of the day, though, how much is this going to cost?
Well, that's the amazing thing about hydrogen, because depending on how you make it, it can actually see significant cost declines in the future. So when we're talking about clean hydrogen, we usually mean green hydrogen produced from renewable electricity. And in that case, your hydrogen is almost as cheap as the renewables that are used to make it. So if you're in a place with really good renewable resources, you'll be able to have cheaper hydrogen. But even in places with less good resources, we think that hydrogen can be cheaper than $1 per kilogram, which is the price of unabated hydrogen today, and around $8 per million BTUs for those who prefer to think in energy units. And that can be achieved anywhere in the world by 2050, we believe.
All right, so let's talk about kind of the pros and cons list. I don't know where cost fits into that, but what are the advantages to hydrogen over other renewables, and then what are the drawbacks?
Yeah, main advantage is the fact that hydrogen can serve roles that electrons struggle with. And that's things like seasonal storage, for instance, or just anything where you need storability, where electrons are harder to store, hydrogen is going to be easier. That also leads to a downside, though, because hydrogen is less energy dense than the usual things that we use for storable energy today, like coal or oil or natural gas. So you will need more volume of storage to handle the same amount of energy.
Let's talk about the viability as well and how it may differ in different geographies. What is your view on that?
Yeah, so for green hydrogen, again, from renewable electricity, really places with the best renewable resources, things like Latin America or the Middle East, even Southern Europe, have really, really good potential for producing hydrogen. And then when you're looking at blue hydrogen, which is produced from natural gas or coal with carbon capture and storage, we do see that becoming more expensive than green hydrogen in the future, especially as renewable electricity costs come down. But that can be a viable option in places like the US Gulf Coast or Russia, where you've got good geological storage for the carbon, as well as ample natural gas that's quite cheap.
All right, great breakdown. Thank you so much to our Meredith Annex, our Bloomberg NEF hydrogen specialist. And of course, you can get more from the Bloomberg NEF team on the terminal and online. And they've recently done a podcast called Hydrogen 101 as part of its Switched On series. So from iron ore titans pivoting to cleaner energy to talk of a hydrogen revolution, that's it from this week's edition of Bloomberg Green. We'll be back next week with a deep dive into the state of electric vehicles. And you can keep the conversation going by following us on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter @Climate. I'm Kaylee Lyons from Bloomberg's World Headquarters in New York, and this is Bloomberg Green.
The great sci-fi art of the mid-20th century teased a vision of the future with one distinct element in common: a life for humans in outer space. Whether vacationing on an exotic new planet or commuting to the moon for business, space travel seemed like it was just around the corner. Yet here we are, a half-century later, and only about 500 human beings have ever left the bounds of Earth's atmosphere. But thanks to a set of ambitious private companies betting on the promise of space tourism, that long-awaited future could be here sooner than we think. For most of the history of spaceflight, governments have been the prime force behind nearly every aspect, from planning to funding to crew selection. But as early as the 1980s, proposals for commercial space tourism began to emerge, along with innovative solutions for getting people there, such as the wild concept of sticking a 74-person passenger cabin in the cargo bay of a NASA space shuttle. Although various non-astronauts have been selected for missions over the years, true space tourism didn't happen until 2001, when an entrepreneur named Dennis Tito coughed up an estimated $20 million to hitch a ride with the Russian Federal Space Agency for a week-long vacation aboard the International Space Station. 20 years later, we're seeing a new contender in this final frontier of tourism: private companies.
It's becoming a private enterprise situation, still very high risk with a high reward, potential reward. But, government is really out of the business of flying people now, and it's really going to be companies like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson that do that heavy lifting. Commercial space tourism is usually about taking the non-astronaut, the private citizen, into an orbital or suborbital flight. So you get a short amount of microgravity experience, and you can float and take some photos. And then you come back. This was something that technology had gotten to a point where the private sector was going to make a business out of this. There are multiple companies that want to get to the place where they fly people into space.
The first of these is Blue Origin, founded in 2000 by Jeff Bezos. Using the autonomous rocket system New Shepard, a tribute to the first American in space, Blue Origin plans to launch up to 6 passengers at a time, offering a rarefied treat of 62-mile-high views and a momentary experience of weightlessness. Booking officially kicked off in May 2021, with the very first seat to be auctioned off for charity. Meanwhile, Richard Branson's Virgin Galactic has also been pursuing a viable form of suborbital tourism, aiming for a launch in 2022 once Sir Richard himself has taken flight.
I'm hoping to be able to go to space. I'd love to be able to coincide it with the moon landing and go to space. So I've got the whip on the team, and we'll see how we go.
The company claims to have lined up over 600 seat reservations so far, including Justin Bieber and Leonardo DiCaprio. Virgin has projected that the final cost of the ticket will be at least $250,000, or roughly $50,000 for each of the 5 minutes or so of weightlessness that you'll get to experience. Although costly, both companies' offerings aim to make suborbital flight a regular form of adventure travel, eventually driving down costs at scale to expand the customer base beyond the orbit of celebrities and billionaires. The third major contender is Elon Musk's SpaceX, which has set its sights even higher on orbital flights, which are
a whole nother level of complexity and energy and danger. When you go suborbital, if you're just going to go up above the von Karman line, which is 100 kilometers or about 62 miles, you only need to get up to maybe 5,000 miles an hour to get up there, and you go basically straight up and then straight back down. You don't have the reentry heating that you would see coming in from an orbital. So when you go orbital, I don't care if you're a baseball or a battleship, you've got to go 17,500 miles per hour, not just 5,000 miles an hour. The energies involved are much greater. By doing that, SpaceX has gone another level up, and that's what they're doing with the Inspiration 4.
Visit inspiration4.com for your chance to go to space.
Inspiration 4 is the first planned all-civilian mission into orbit, slated to launch in late 2021. The crew will bring their own set of diverse perspectives and backgrounds and experiences to test how a group of different people, namely people who aren't professional astronauts, could fare in space.
Until now, astronauts have had to be physically perfect, and this mission is changing that. And so I feel incredibly honored to be representing those who aren't physically perfect. At age 10, I was diagnosed with bone cancer, and I was treated at St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. And I spent a year there undergoing intense chemo and also surgery that ultimately saved my leg. I now work at St. Jude as a PA, a physician assistant, and I work with leukemia and lymphoma patients. The kids we work with are so brave, and they are very excited to watch me go to space because this is showing them that, you know, they're capable of doing this as well.
Haley, along with 3 other crew members, will spend 3 days in space, orbiting the Earth every 90 minutes before landing back off the coast of Florida.
Well, when you think about access, the first astronauts for the United States came from the test pilot side. And so women weren't allowed to be a part of that. We have somebody in their 20s, somebody in their 30s, somebody in their 40s, and somebody in their 50s. And so there can be access in all kinds of ways, whether you're talking about age, whether you're talking about gender, whether you're talking about race and ethnicity, and all of those things.
The first time, people are going up into space and not sent there by a superpower like the United States or Russia or China. Well, that's like really significant. And you've got to be very thoughtful about it. The whole game plan right now is to make space like really affordable and accessible for everybody, so that you can have fishing buddies going to space someday. But the first is special. And so with that, we wanted to have a crew selection process that could make space available to everyday people.
Getting to space is only the first step for space tourism. The next challenge is what to do and where to stay when you get there. Axiom Space is planning to launch the first segment of a new commercial space station in 2024. Their $2 billion project, called Ax Station, will become the first free-flying private international space station. Or, to use a more consumer-friendly term, a space hotel. Axiom isn't the only company out to make your space stay a little more comfortable. Iglo Aerospace has been building what they call expandable habitat technology, like their B330, an inflatable pod module that expands once in orbit.
There's even one attached to the International Space Station right now they've been testing. And you take it up and it's rather small, and then you inflate it, and it seems to be working very, very well. This is likely to be the first kind of tourist hotel that you're going to see up in space. First of all, it's easier to carry instead of this giant tin can with all of that. The inflatables are lighter. You can just blow them up, and they get a nice big size for about less than half the weight probably.
But even as space missions become accessible to civilians,
the risks of going into space are incredibly high. And you could die 1,000 ways that we can think of and 1,000 other ways that we can't think of.
This is Michelle Hanlon. She's a space lawyer at the Mississippi School of Law, focused on protecting humans in outer space.
Now, I'm not an attorney for any of the space tourists, so I haven't been privy to their private contracts. But I can tell you that the FAA requires certain waivers to be in those contracts. So, for example, the FAA says, well, we're not going to make you make your spacecraft to a certain safety level. We are going to make you, spacecraft operator, make sure that you inform your space tourists of all of the hazards that you know of. I'd imagine a very long waiver, all the ways you can die in space. And you have to understand that there's health risks, and you have to indemnify the US government if you are launching from the United States. So those are things that we know a space tourist has to sign and has to waive. So now let's go back and think about our space flight participants. The FAA calls space tourists space flight participants. They don't call them astronauts. Why is that important? If you're not an astronaut, there's no obligation to rescue you if something goes wrong. It's a lot of money to set up a rescue launch. If it can even be done, it's something really important to think about, and that difference as we cross this threshold from having astronauts in space to having real people like me in space.
And when we are able to make it to space reliably enough, there's still a host of other legal and ethical issues to consider before space tourism can truly take off.
There are so many gaps in space law that we are going to have to put in a lot of sort of basement ideas. And so, for example, the Outer Space Treaty is a treaty that offers principles and guidelines for state activities, for the activities of national governments. It doesn't talk about private entities. It doesn't talk about humans in space. So now if something goes wrong, so let's think about all the times hotels on Earth are sued, right? So slip and falls. You step on something in the bathroom, you sue the hotel, and it becomes a private lawsuit. Because of the vagaries of international law, if something happens in space, well, boy, you can sue the state that launched your spacecraft. You can sue the company that brought you there. You can sue the hotel. You can sue the individual. You can sue every government related to that, because the way the Outer Space Treaty and the Outer Space Regime have set this up is that anything that happens in space first has to go through a diplomatic channel before you think about suing in a court of law. And so every single slip and fall in a space hotel is a diplomatic nightmare. And so we really need to figure that out before we start sending a lot of people there. You think about human rights in space. Here, we don't think about a human right to oxygen because it's kind of all around us and free. It's not in a space hotel. So what happens if something happens and the oxygen depletes? Who gets the oxygen first? And then, of course, let's not even think about the labor. How do you treat your labor in a space hotel where that person may be there for 2 or 3 years without coming back to Earth? So a lot of things to think about.
Space habitats are more likely in the near future to focus on research missions and be a home for experiments that can't happen as easily back on Earth.
Space hotels, I think they garner a lot of headlines and a lot of news, but at the same time, that's not the first thing that you're going to see happen. They don't offer the compelling business case, I think, that you'll see from a place that wants to manufacture pharmaceuticals or a new type of crystal or some type of filament or fiber optic cables and other things that you can do in microgravity. The things that are actually, a high value finished good, when you get that back to Earth and you sell it for a very, very huge profit margin, that's what's likely to happen in space, as opposed to having a real estate platform that you sell to a tourist. A space hotel is really interesting, and it will probably happen, but it's not likely to be at the forefront of space commerce.
Even if space hotels are right around the corner, don't get too excited about booking a trip in one.
It's not a cheap ticket to ride to space, and it's going to be, millionaires and billionaires and that sort. But at the same time, the point was made that in the early days of airline trips, that was also a completely unaffordable ticket for most people. Those people who flew were people of means, and over time it becomes affordable to the masses. And I think that's the goal for all the entrepreneurs in space as well, to get those costs down to a point where it's not $10 million or $5 million or $300,000 ride into suborbital space. When it becomes more like buying a first-class ticket to go to Europe from the United States. So that's the goal, and the question is, can we get to that point?
Given the immense operating costs of getting to space, it may be years, if ever, until space tourism becomes a profitable venture for any of these companies. Virgin Galactic, the only publicly traded company of the three, has had a particularly rocky year, initially riding on the momentum of a SPAC deal, but more recently beset by launch delays and major funders, including Branson himself, selling large quantities of their stock in the company.
Space is really, really, really hard, and it's an absolute cliche, but it's one that happens to be very true. It's just really hard to do. That's also the reason that you've seen the delays that, Virgin had talked about flying years and years ago. And it became such a crazy point that Richard Branson actually stopped talking about it when he was asked, because it was never going to be when he predicted. But it's not insurmountable. And, investors have stepped up because this is something that is doable.
Despite the astronomical dangers and costs of getting to space, it may ultimately follow the course of other once fanciful modes of travel.
Wright brothers having, what was by modern standards a very unimpressive first flight, at Kitty Hawk. I mean, you had less than 20 years later, you had your first airborne ambulances being used to save lives. Fundamentally, the world is a more interesting place when people can go and dance among the stars and such.
The lure of space is innate. It's in our DNA. It's that exploration bug. We are an exploratory species, and we want to go out there and see what's out there.
That vision that I had in 1969 of seeing normal human beings travel into space, it's finally beginning to happen. When you get a bunch of people up there and they can all see it for themselves, that'll create even yet another revolution in how we treat our planet and the way we think about it.
So while 2001 came and went without quite looking like Stanley Kubrick's ultimate space fantasy, 2021 might finally be the year we're catching up.
If you visit California, you might be inclined to go to Disneyland, or jump in your convertible and take Highway 1 up the coast, or maybe make a pilgrimage to Yosemite. All very fine choices. But if you're the kind of person who revels in our planet's extremes, then it's Route 395 that you're after. This one glorious road will carry you from Death Valley's desert floor to sky-high views of Mount Whitney. You can see the 5,000-year-old bristlecone pines, the oldest living organisms. Or the bizarre tufa towers of Mono Lake. And true to California's boom and bust spirit, you can saunter around the ghost town of Bodie. What a novel experience to find an empty American city where all the businesses are shut down. To do 395 upright, it helps to have a guide, and mine is a man named Jan, and his crew, Heron,
Let's tidy up first.
and Lemmy, the hardest partying dog of all time. Jan agreed to show me some of what 395 has to offer, but only if we agreed not to disclose any locations.
My name is Jan Swirstra. I'm an industrial designer out of LA, and I spend a lot of time camping and a lot of time in the Eastern Sierra. It's a place I love, and sometimes I'm known as 395 North because my Instagram account, and I don't like to be known as that, but I'm trying to use it to set a good example and do more with it than just social media.
Where did we end up camping? We got here late last night. I wasn't even sure where we are.
This is BLM land, right on the outskirts of National Forest, and it's one of my favorite places in the world. Basically, everything outdoors wrapped into one.
Yeah. Good thing about California, man.
Oh, man. We have so much national forest and public land that you can literally just cruise out and find a place to camp. It's ours.
What I wish was mine is Jan's sweet truck.
It's a 2019 Ford Ranger. Has about 200 watts of solar in it and a fridge, and has everything that an RV has except for a toilet, but just on a smaller, simple scale.
And you drive us around day to day in LA.
Yep.
And then just roll out when you want.
It's my daily driver. Handles great. And then when I'm done with work, I can just bail and go camping. So the camper basically has only what I need. Think of it as backpacking with a car.
Yeah.
The fridge has a couple compartments. This is just a kitchen box, stove, utensils, and a bunch of stuff. This one has just dry food. Then when you get inside, there's a bed. The bed flips up, so you've got tons of room in here. This awning is phenomenal. If you want to pull that over.
That's cool.
Let me just pop that up.
Sorted.
So, home on wheels.
Yeah.
This is my vacation house.
Dude, it's so nice, man. Even with his nomad lifestyle, Jan faces the same big question as the rest of us. Do the internet and smartphones have to ruin everything? When you find the super special, beautiful spots, is that you busting out a map and like looking where it might be cool to go, or is it word of mouth and just getting to know people, the locals? And
if I see a dirt road, I just want to go down it. So a lot of it's just aimless rambling. It's a desire to just see something. Check that out. For some reason, it's more fulfilling than getting a recommendation from somebody. Or there's tons of apps and websites now, road trip apps, camping apps. and they've proliferated. The knowledge is accessible on the internet, right? I used to fight the geotags, and I would get really pissed off. Like, why are you posting this place? It's going to blow up. It's going to get trashed. Now I've realized that you can't fight it. The internet has just shrunk the world. So we're not going to stop it. We're not going to stop people from going there. So I'm a lot more focused in conversation now with trying to set a good example. When you go, pick up your trash. When you're pooping out in the wilderness, don't leave your toilet paper on the top. You know, make sure you follow, good steps for leaving no trace.
As a thank you for this quick guide to pooping etiquette, we made Jan, Heron, and Lemmy some tacos. And we all took in the night sky and knocked back a couple of drinks. Take that, Apocalypse. The thing about good times and serenity in 2020 is that they're fleeting at best. After we split up from Jan and continued on our way, smoke started to envelop us. The plus side was that our RV no longer smelled like feet. The downside was breathing. My man David here suggested that we try and outflank the smoke by cutting through Yosemite. Without a reservation, we had to talk our way in.
Yes, no stopping, no getting out, and yeah, no problem. We just wanted to get through.
It was a beautiful choice.
Glad we got out of the smoke.
Whoa, okay. But not quite as effective as we had hoped. Fast forward 4 hours or so, and we had managed to trade the smoky majesty of Yosemite for the smoky,
Look at it.
strip malls of the Central Valley.
We have made it sort of out of the smoke, all the way across Yosemite National Park and here to the gorgeous Central Valley of California. We're off to see a kind of surprising tech startup that is making some pretty strange machines to serve all the growers out in this region. And we're here in this near Fresno. This is California farm country, right?
We're just south of Fresno, a town called Kingsburg. So we're right in the Central Valley of California, very, very large farming valley here. It's kind of considered the breadbasket of the world.
The Central Valley stretches out over about 20,000 square miles, and the farmers here produce about 1/4 of the food that Americans eat, including a whole lot of fruits and nuts.
Tell me a little bit of the background of Gus. I know some of this is like a family business. The roots of this go back a ways. Tell me kind of like how we got to what's essentially like a startup, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. So the founder of our company is Dave Crinklaw, and he started the business back in 1982. He started with is basically with his dad was commercial spraying of trees and vineyards. Got to the point where our biggest challenge was labor, just the shortage of it, really. He was forced into innovating, and he had this idea for quite some time about doing a driverless sprayer, and it finally got to the point where he said, you know what, I either got to get out of this business or I'm going to innovate.
Organic or not, crops need to be sprayed, and this process has to take place a few times a year. This means hiring a lot of people to work long hours under serious pressure. And so, just like the tech bros to the north, Gus decided to solve all of its problems with robots.
On this like labor point, you guys have set this up where you can have somebody in a truck and that one person can monitor, I think, like 8 of these.
In order to operate Gus, you have one guy or girl that sits in a pickup and they monitor from a laptop computer. So that person is basically just watching all the vehicles on the screen. They can monitor up to 8 of them at a time while they're out there spraying in the orchard. And so that user interface really provides them with all the information they need to make sure that the machines are safe and that they're doing the correct job. So it tells them what speed they're driving, the engine RPM, the amount of gallonage per acre that they're applying at any given time. So if any one of the machines has an issue, it's going to send an alert to that laptop.
Much like a self-driving car, these beasts use GPS, LiDAR, and cameras to see and navigate the world around them. They also rely on pre-built maps of the orchards for extra guidance. Gus builds the machines right here, and then takes them out for robot training on this orchard next door. It's here that the company learns if the machines will behave and do as their software and human masters command.
So this is kind of like this is a test orchard where you guys put it through the paces and work on the technology?
Yeah, so this is our test orchard right here. It's right by our building, as you can see in the background. So every new machine, as it comes off the assembly line, it's put through a commissioning test right here. We test all the sensors on the machine, autonomous computer, all the safety systems, make sure it's doing what it's doing prior to when it's delivered to a customer.
So what's it doing now?
So right now he's doing a test spray. So he's just turning the water on to make sure that the system comes up to pressure, spraying water out of the nozzles just to make sure it's all functioning properly.
Okay. It's got like a crazy turbine at the back, or?
Yeah, so it's basically just a big fan.
Okay.
And that fan's driven off of the Cummins diesel motor, and it just basically creates a big airflow.
Gus is already selling these vehicles to brave modern farmers. And people the world over have taken notice of its machines.
And have you just sold them in the Central Valley or like throughout the U.S. or even overseas, or where are they going?
Yeah, so right now the majority of our machines are here in California in the Central Valley. However, we do have machines and customers in Florida in the citrus industry over there, as well as Australia.
And I think you started selling them in like December of 2019?
Yeah,
right?
So we started taking orders early last year for the sprayers, and the first deliveries we made were in December of 2019.
Okay, so. And how much do they cost each?
So our retail price on these machines is $285,000.
So it's like it's not a small investment, but I'm sure the regular sprayers aren't cheap.
Yeah,
either.
I mean we're honestly not too far away from conventional equipment on our price, and the main thing is that the return on investment is very quick due to all the labor savings and the increased efficiency. I mean, these machines, they just drive. But basically what we're doing, besides this machine, this is our first machine, we call it Orchard Gus. mainly designed for your nut trees, as well as citrus and fruit. In the future, we're working on a few other projects. We're going to do more machines. One of them is actually a vineyard sprayer, so vineyards are much tighter spacing, so the machine has to be physically smaller. And then we've got our eyes on doing a lot of other innovating.
That right there, friends, is a Central Valley farmer putting his whole fruit basket on the table. Gary's TED Talk can't be far off. And with that, it was time to get back in the RV and to confront what happens when three men are bested by their own failings and the forces of entropy. Next on Hello World, we cruise into the Mojave Desert in search of a lunar lander.
We have instruments that we are going to deliver to the South Pole of the Moon in December of 2022. Instruments that are trying to scan the surface of the moon.
And hang with a test pilot who walked away from this.
Meet Betty. She lives by herself, but for the last few months, she hasn't been alone.
LQ, tell me a joke.
Did you hear about the claustrophobic astronaut?
No.
Apparently, he just needed a little space.
Most technology isn't made for 93-year-olds. But this woman is making sure that this particular robot is.
LQ, who are you?
She's researching the way we interact with machines. And if she has her way, robots will soon be a trusty companion for all of us.
My name is LQ. How can I help you?
As technology replaces old jobs, it's also creating new ones. I'm Aki Ito, and I'm here to show you the jobs of the future.
My name is Danielle Ishak, and I am a human-robot interaction researcher. It's really hard to intuitively design a robot meant for a consumer audience. You have to make sure that it's a robot that people want, people know how to use, and people value.
Danielle works for an Israeli startup called Intuition Robotics. Its U.S. office is here in downtown San Francisco.
Hello?
Hey Danielle, it's Aki.
Come on in.
The company is funded by a couple big names like Samsung and Toyota. Full disclosure, Bloomberg's venture capital arm is an investor too.
This is LQ.
Can I take her out for a spin?
Please.
LQ, tell me what you can do.
I am a proactive social robot designed for older adults. I can connect you to your family and friends, and even play music.
These features might remind you of the Amazon Echo, but you'd be missing the point if you compared her to a smart speaker. She's not meant to just be useful. She's meant to be a companion.
Why don't you take a break and have a drink?
And that's why she has a head that can nod and make other subtle gestures you might expect from a pet.
Through our research with older adults, we're finding that almost on a daily basis, we see that somebody tells her that they love her.
Really?
Or that they like her. Or that they miss
literally,
her.
I love you?
Mm-hmm. They'll also tell her, I'm depressed, or I'm lonely. They'll open up to her in a way that they might not necessarily open up to a human because they don't feel like they'll be judged.
LEQ isn't on sale yet. But a prototype is already in the homes of about a dozen early testers who live in the Bay Area.
LEQ, tell me what the weather is today.
Danielle's job is to figure out what's working and what's not.
Sorry, please rephrase your request.
And she does that by visiting each of her testers twice a month.
How important are these visits to your job?
They're critical. We're building a product for people who we are not. I'm not a senior, and how could you know how to design for somebody if you don't do research? Because otherwise, you would just be designing in the dark.
Jobs like Danielle's are just starting to emerge. Until recently, robots were mostly in factories, separated from humans. But now, they're finally getting cheap enough, small enough, and smart enough to be in our homes. This has created a whole new challenge of designing robots that people will actually want to interact with. And that's where Danielle comes in. Her research has helped shape every little facet of LEQ, from the way LEQ moves to the way she talks.
It's a very special job, and it can be really hard, and it can be really frustrating, but at the end of the day, it's incredibly rewarding. And I think the most rewarding part about it is when I see the joy on the users' faces, like that they saw their feedback turned into something real.
Today, we've driven east of San Francisco to go see one of Danielle's research participants.
LEQ, tell me something interesting.
Did you know that Ronald Reagan was a lifeguard in high school and saved 77 people's lives?
Now, see, this is where a conversation is. She should open up and I should say, no, I did not know that. I expect her to be able to continue a conversation for at least a couple of comments.
Yeah. And why is that?
Why?
Yeah.
Because that's companionship.
When Betty was around Danielle's age, she was working with some of history's very first computers.
When I was finishing up my master's degree, I was working at Harvard in the computer lab when they were building Mark IV. A large room-sized computer. But now, this artificial intelligence stuff is amazing. LEQ?
Yes?
Schedule a doctor's appointment.
No problem. I'm working on it.
When Danielle brought along the idea of working with robotics for the elderly, I said, are you kidding me? Will older people connect to a robot? And she said, I don't know, let's research and find out.
Danielle grew up here in this suburb of Atlanta. Her parents spent much of their childhoods in Israel and met in the US.
We as immigrants, we understood that we might need to work a little harder. In fact, I feel that rather than taken away from Danielle, it gave her so much more, because she understood the fact that you need to run after your dreams and work really hard, no matter what the challenges are.
School didn't come easily for Danielle.
I have dyslexia, and that very much affected my self-esteem academically.
The principal of the school did not recommend her to take advanced classes. She fought for it, and she got into it, and she did very well with them, too.
Danielle's first job out of grad school was at X, the secretive research facility founded by Google. It's known for dreaming up all kinds of wacky, far-flung ideas.
Can you tell us about the moonshots you worked on?
No, I can't tell you too much about the projects that I worked on. I can say that I was working on robotics.
She loved the job, but wanted to work on something that would reach real consumers sooner. So she left X after a year and joined Intuition Robotics. She's been working in the field for 4 years now, and it took her a while to find her footing in a male-dominated industry.
I've gone to different meetups where there'll be like a circle of men with their like zip-up jacket with their like company logo on it and a beer in their hand. And I'll come in with lipstick and nobody wants to talk to me. This is my closet.
So at first she did her best to fit in, wearing a pair of glasses she didn't need and toning down her style.
So what's the kind of thing you used to wear to a conference?
Stuff like this, blousey things that make you look like you're 40.
But that got old after a while.
And what's the kind of thing you wear now?
Now it's like I just enjoy being kind of expressive and playful in what I wear.
Before we wrap up for the day, Danielle has one more LEQ tester to visit. Joseph is 97. And he's had the robot in his home for 8 months.
How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good. How has Miss LEQ been?
She always tells me to take a drink of water at least 4 times a day.
So we added a whole bunch of new facts to LEQ.
Did you know that a cup of chopped red bell pepper contains more vitamin C than an orange?
Okay. What did you think of that?
Certainly, the print was, I could see that quite clearly.
What about this?
I can see that. LEQ, play music.
No problem. It will begin shortly.
By 2050, almost 500 million people are going to be 80 or older. And if current trends continue, more and more are going to be like Joseph and Betty, living alone.
LEQ, stop.
Today, both of them are doing okay. But some of Danielle's other participants have been struggling.
Is it kind of hard to leave them at the end of the day?
It is. Some of our testers are pretty advanced in the stages of depression through loneliness and isolation. And at times, I know that LEQ is cheering them up in their day, but I know that it's only part of the way. No source of artificial intelligence robots will ever be able to replace humans and human companionship or human care.
The key to Danielle's work is to embrace that very limitation of machines.
Robots should help humans do what they love, help humans interact with more humans, help humans in general. Not pull humans away from humans, not take humans' jobs and leave humans without purpose.
Whether it's in our workplaces or in our homes, robots are soon going to be everywhere. And it's up to Danielle to make sure this robot-filled future leaves us just a little better off.
So don't be afraid. And if you are afraid, come and join us, because I promise it's a friendly place.
Times are tough. Jobs are scarce. It's risky to be outside and around others. Seems like there's very few ways to make extra money during a pandemic. So I guess I'll just hunker down and binge social media until this all blows over. Wait, don't these people make money? How do these people make money? Streamers, YouTubers, Twitch stars. How do they make money? Is it a lot? Is it a lot of work? I know, I gotta ask somebody in the biz, and I got just the guy. Austin John Plays.
This is your full-time job now, right?
As of November of last year, yes. This was always just kind of like a side thing. Like, any money that I made from doing my videos and whatever else, I never touched that because I didn't really think of that as being like real money. And then it started coming in more and more. And then it was like I hit my first day that I broke $1,000 and I was like, this is actually going to be money.
How did the YouTube channel come to be?
When the game Pokemon Sun and Moon came out for the 3DS, there was like things that I learned about the game, and then I wanted to just share that information with people. And at the time, I didn't have any way to capture a screen or anything, so I found like generic footage, and I kind of put it all together with so much editing. And that video got 6 views. And then 2 days later, I made another one, and that one got 12 views. And then I just started pumping out more and more content, and people were like, this guy knows what he's talking about. It really just started building on top of itself, and then it was like, my channel really focuses on tips and tricks. So I play a straight 18 hours, and I'll finish the game or get to about the 40-hour mark, and then I'll make my first video. While I'm going through, I have a giant notepad and just scribbles everywhere, and I make these notes of like the things that stumped me, so I know the things that may stump other people.
What do you need to think about if you're building your YouTube channel? 1,
you need to do something that you're passionate about. Not that you like, not that you think you're gonna make money on, something you're passionate about. The other thing is something that other people are passionate about. It holds a special place to them. And third is, it needs to be something that people are gonna seek out information on. In order to enter into the marketplace, you either need to be better than everyone else, you either need to be faster than everyone else, or you need to be more accessible than everyone else. And you can't be more accessible because it's already on the platform. Granted, if you understand how the algorithm works, which is very similar to Google Analytics, then yeah, you can have a little bit of a head start. But if you're not doing it faster, and if you're not doing it better than everyone else, then why should anyone watch your channel? So my income as a YouTuber kind of breaks down to 3 different ways. 1, which is the bulk of it, which is ad revenue. Whenever you go and you watch a video and then there's an ad and then you wait 5 seconds and you hit the bottom right corner and then you go on to the next video, or a non-skippable ad, or the video starts immediately, you get the little banner ad at the bottom, or if you scroll down from the video, the first thing that shows there is an ad. Those are the 4 different types of ads that can appear on every single YouTube video. And all of them pay a certain amount. It varies on lots of things, like the country of the person who posts it, the country of the person who watches it, the time of year, where you are in the quarter, if there's anything going on with a reduction in ad revenue. Like, great example, COVID-19, companies weren't spending as much on advertising. So because of that, CPM went down. CPM stands for click per thousand. I'm using the Roman numeral for 1,000. And that means that for every 1,000 views, you get a certain amount of money. Now, on low ads, when I first started off, my CPM was 30 cents. So every 1,000 views, I made 30 cents. But then once I signed with an MCN and I started making more quality content and more engaging content, some of my better videos and certain times of the year, I can see CPMs as high as $12 to $14. And there's a big fluctuation between, you know, if I post a video when there's no ads being spent, like January and February, that's the reason a lot of your favorite YouTubers and also TV shows don't post new videos in that time of year because ad rates are down. Why are they going to make content then? Instead, you're recording and you're bulking up for when ad revenue is higher. The second way that a YouTuber makes income is support, crowdfunding, things like that. When I first started off, Patreon was really the only option, but then they started rolling out supporters and members for YouTube channels. So whenever I have a live stream, you can click a button and then you can become a member, and then you get special icons next to your name. I believe they're called badges, or on any video, you can hit the join button, and that helps support the channel. And then the third aspect of that would be merch. And for me, my merch has been somewhat basic. In fact, I'm wearing one of my t-shirts from last year right now. You have to endure the times that your first video gets 6 views, that you post it on Reddit and they say, shut up, and then an auto mod bans you. You have to go through that, because until you go through that and you discover why you're doing it, you're not doing it for other people, you're doing it for yourself. If you're not loving what you do, then it's not worth it.
Huh. So make a channel about something that I'm passionate about. Oh, sweet. I guess I can make the channel about that. How do I grow an audience? How do I get popular?
It's all about diversification, right? You have to have a massive Twitter following. You have to have a massive Instagram following. You have to have a massive YouTube following. Of course, you have to be on Twitch, which is the key platform. But basically, any way you can get in front of your audience, you can engage with your audience, is going to drive those clicks, which ultimately drives the advertiser revenue that you get back from all of these platforms.
It's me and Dan playing video games and talking in a funny manner over them.
They're not just people who are good at games, they're actually people who are good at online engagement, online entertainment, first and foremost.
You have the right to remain stylish. Anything you wear can and will be used against you in the court of fashion.
The streamer is either very, very talented at the game. The best player in the game is generally going to draw a crowd because people like watching people who are very good. On the other hand, they're either very, very good or funny, charismatic, whatever it is on that side.
Oh, no.
You know, it becomes more of a show where they talk about other things outside of the gaming world, and gaming becomes really just a backdrop and an excuse to engage with that audience.
There were those weird, like, Ronald McDonald, like, straight to VHS movies. You remember those?
I'm personable, I'm chatty. I would kind of, you know, when boring things were happening in the game, I would ramble on about, you know, movies I'd watched or books I'd read and, you know, or conversations I'd had and stuff like that. And so I think being personable was a big part of that.
It's not just getting on and playing games. It's getting on and being an entertainer. You are putting on a show.
All right, now let me go ahead and grab the samurai sword that every gym has. Okay, he's dead.
To have a larger audience and to have that audience, I think, stay with you, you have to bring something extra. You know, you have to find your niche. You have to find what works and what connects with the audience and what makes them laugh and what makes them keep coming back.
You gotta make it a little more exciting, all right? Throw in a hanging bishop. Have everybody in suspense for a moment.
I think the real most important thing is to just get used to being on camera. Like in any sort of performance thing, is get used to talking on camera. You know, my first few videos were terrible, but because I sat down and did it for 6 to 8 hours a day, I just got used to talking and I got over that uncomfortable hump.
If you go into Twitch purely with the expectation that you're going to make money, make a job out of it, have all this growth, and it's going to be great, you're probably going to burn out prior to getting to that point because there's very little payoff for a long time, right? Like multiple years generally before you really start to see a payoff. And so, you know, those first few times you're streaming, nobody is there. One person shows up every 30 minutes, says hi, maybe, and leaves, right? Like, it's very discouraging, I think, for a lot of people. And so you have to be there just loving it. You have to love talking to yourself when nobody is around. You have to love just the game that you're playing, all of that stuff, because it takes a while. And I think a majority of people burn out prior to getting to the, like, profitable point of it.
And there you have it. My very own YouTube, Twitch, Discord, and streaming channels all ready to go live. It's a veritable social media ecosystem just on the verge of thriving. So, don't forget to smash like and subscribe, and visit my Patreon for perks. Also, go to my merch page. And one last thing, stay cool, my friends.
Using social media, do we anticipate that having any impact on his campaign if he's able to, you know, run a campaign from Twitter, from Truth Social, from prison, if that were to happen? You know, I have to wonder whether or not that would move the needle.
All right, Joe, can he do that?
I'm sorry, you'll have to say it again.
Well, in terms of having, and June Grosso is also here with us. We want to actually bring in our team here because we do have June Grosso. She's Bloomberg host of Bloomberg Law and Bloomberg Radio, legal analyst. We also have Joshua Katzenberg. He is Kastenberg, excuse me, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School, former prosecutor and defense counsel in many trials in the U.S. Air Force. June, come on in on that question of running for office.
I would 100% doubt that Donald Trump is going to be in prison while this campaign is going on, or even after the campaign is going on. There are going to be, even if he is convicted, this is all if down the road. If he's convicted, there will be appeals of that conviction. I mean, that could go on for years and years and years.
But I mean, technically...
Well, but think about this.
But he won't be in prison is the point.
Do you see him in prison? Where are the Secret Service going? Are they going to be in the cell adjacent to him?
Does Secret Service come with him?
This has never happened before. He is entitled to Secret Service protection wherever he goes. And yes, they'll be with him. So that's a whole question of, you know, will that ever happen? I doubt it.
We're getting ahead of ourselves because we know at this point that we have 34 counts of falsifying business records and that the former president has pled guilty in that. We are looking for more details when it comes to this. Forgive me, he pleaded not guilty, forgive me. Not guilty to those counts. So I do want to bring in Joshua Katzenberg, as we said, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School. Professor Katzenberg, you were a former prosecutor and also have been a defense counsel for the U.S. Air Force. What is it that is most important that you see in these charges, understand about these charges as the details will ultimately come out?
Well, you know, first of all, we don't know what the evidence is that's going to be backing these charges. The charges are simply ink on a sheet that the prosecutor was able to show to a grand jury and obtain an indictment by probable cause for that. So we'll get more clarity to the strength of the prosecution's case in the days and weeks ahead through a process known as discovery, and that's when the prosecutor has to name witnesses and provide evidence over to Mr. Trump's defense counsel. Having said that, you know, these charges, business fraud type charges, are going to be characterized in a lot of different ways, but at their core, whenever someone is charged with a crime of fraud, they're really essentially, just like tax fraud, they're charged with a crime of not paying into the system what the system demands of them. In this case, you think about, you know, money that New York, the state of New York collects. This is money that goes to police salaries, teacher salaries, school improvements, road improvements, keeping the subways running, things like that. And so this isn't just, you know, you're going to hear, look, it's a political crime. They're not serious charges. Well, if you talk to a police officer who hasn't gotten a raise or a teacher who's looking at retirement, it all adds up.
So the indictment has officially been unsealed. When will we potentially get the details on what is involved in this indictment? June, do you want to jump in on that?
Well, we can get the details any moment. I mean, I think what the problem is that there are no electronic devices allowed in the courtroom. So the reporters that are in the courtroom are not able to tell us what happened. I mean, once the charges are unsealed, we should be able to get them pretty quickly. But
Well,
we
June, let
haven't
me
really
ask
been
you
through
about
this before.
There's a lot talked about being a narrative indictment, a speaking indictment. What's the significance of that?
Well, a speaking indictment would allow the prosecutor, for example, the prosecutor has been attacked from every which way, right? Politicians, ordinary people on the street, Trump and his lawyers. So the thing is that a talking indictment would allow them to just sort of tell the story of this indictment, give some of the evidence they have. It wouldn't be what a legal document that you would normally see from a state prosecutor where it lists charge after charge after charge, and a person who's not a lawyer looks at it, or even a lawyer looks at it and goes, what is that? Let me look up statute, whatever. This would make it easier, I think, for the general public, and also might be a vindication for Alvin Bragg of bringing this case, because we'll see what it is, probably without his having to have that press conference.
Well, and I do wonder, and Professor Katzenberg, come on back in here. There has been so much talked about that this has been a case 4 or 5 years in the making. It's been a zombie case that's dropped by, D.A. Bragg's predecessor. Does that matter that it takes so long to bring a case, or does it show that there's been a lot of time really kind of ferreting out the information and talking to witnesses? How do you see it?
Well, it matters that it takes that long to bring a case to trial, but I think we can read a lot of different angles into that. And one angle I'd suggest is, the Trump's attorneys, they're saying, well, look, even the DOJ didn't bring this forward, and as are the former president's backers in Congress. But let's keep in mind that Mr. Trump dismissed a very well-regarded United States attorney from the Southern District of New York, Mr. Preet Bharara. He put his own people in there, and so we don't know what happened in the U.S. Attorney's Office, whether they looked at the charges and said, they're good, but we're not going to go forward, or they looked at potential charges and said, they're terrible, we're not going to go forward. Then we get to Cy Vance, his tenure as DA. These may not be the identical charges that Vance's team was looking at. We don't know that either. But it is problematic because it makes for quite a bit of political fodder, both in Congress and on the street. Having said that, I agree with the speaking indictment being the right way to go, because the speaking indictment is something that an ordinary citizen can pick up in online or in the newspaper on print and read it and say, okay, I understand what these charges are about now.
All right, just to reset, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Radio here in our New York headquarters, of course, on YouTube and, of course, on Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Massar, along with Madison Mills. We've got June Grasso with us. She is host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio. Joshua Kastenberg, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School. The headlines, as we know, former President Donald Trump is in a New York courthouse. He is being arraigned. Manhattan DA Bragg has unsealed the charges in that criminal case against the former U.S. president, who is the first in terms of a case to go against a former U.S. president of this ilk. And the president is expected to go back to Florida after the proceedings. We are also expected to hear from DA Bragg after this process. So, June, the specifics are so important, and I feel like there's been a lot of time and a lot of conversations over the last 5 days of just speculation. What is it in particular you're looking out for when we get these specifics? As you said, they should be released at any moment.
Well, now we're seeing that he's pleading not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records.
This is according to the New York Times.
That leads me to believe that what we have been speculating about for a week now or more is actually the case, that there are the business records that he falsified according to the prosecutor here, and that will be connected to a felony by saying there was an intent to violate campaign finance laws. I mean, that's what it seems like at this point, that it is what we've been talking about, and also what we knew because we saw the different witnesses going into the grand jury. We saw Michael Cohen go in twice. Yeah. We saw.
So this is all off of what happened to Michael Cohen, right?
People are putting this together from different elements, different pieces here and there, and it seems to make sense. Now, it could be wrong.
Is it all related to the hush money?
Yes, I think it's all well, it's related either to, this is all speculation, may I say? It's related either to the hush money payments to Stormy Daniels or to Karen McDougal, because they brought in David Pecker, who was involved with the Karen McDougal payment. So one assumes that that also is part of the charges, but I'm tired. I'm really wish they'd show us what it is. Show us your cards, because it's getting to be a lot just to keep speculating.
It is, and it's difficult without even a camera in the courtroom, which is typical in New York. But you know, the judge could have made a different decision here. Obviously, did not. I want to bring you in, Professor Katzenberg, on exactly what we were just talking about with the hush money, just to back up and ask the dumb question here. Can you explain to our audience, you know, paying hush money? It's not typically a crime, but it's different if you're running for office, correct? Can you explain the legality behind that?
That's correct. Paying hush money is not typically a crime. If you're running for office, it's not necessarily a crime either. But if you're using campaign money, or you're filtering campaign money to pay off someone, and you're trying to show that it's a legitimate campaign expense, there is no legitimate campaign expense related to hush money, and so therefore it's a crime. Put another way, it could be a defense for Mr. Trump to say, look, I went into my own bank account and paid this individual off, and I didn't try to take a tax write-off on it or a business expense on it. I just took it as my own loss and didn't report the loss to the government. That wouldn't be a crime at all. But I think we'll see in this indictment that there's more to it than that it was written off as a campaign expense or as a business loss, and that you can't do.
I mean, so Professor Kastenberg, I mean, so it's not going to be a case, or could it be a case, where the former president says, I didn't instruct it, I didn't tell them to do it, and that indeed what I paid my lawyer at the time, my fixer, as many people have called Michael Cohen, that it was for legal expenses. Could that possibly be his defense? And a strong one at that.
So it's possible, but I would say I wouldn't overstate how strong that defense is, because there's something known as an ostrich instruction. And the ostrich instruction to a jury is you cannot intentionally make yourself ignorant of the facts. And to an ordinary person sitting on a jury, you know, we go to the adult of ordinary intelligence. You don't just write tens of thousands of dollars off to somebody and say, I'm not going to check up on this, and sign documents without asking what those documents are first. I mean, the ostrich defense usually goes to someone who, a friend of theirs says, hey, can you drive my car across town for me, and park it at my brother's house, and unbeknownst to the driver, there's cocaine in the car. That's where the ostrich defense comes in. But this is a lot more sophisticated than that. They'll probably try it. But I would say that's not a particularly strong defense.
Another defense that some of his lawyers have actually talked about is to say that his intent was not to defraud. His intent was to protect his wife and his family from these horrible allegations. So that's sort of like what John Edwards, more than a decade ago, used in his campaign finance trial.
Yeah, that's true. Protecting your family members. You can have really good political and moral discussions about who are you actually protecting if you're the center of those allegations. But it's possible. On the other hand, Mr. Trump is no stranger to controversy. And, I think the prosecutor will counter on that one. Why this matter and not the so many other ones that have cropped up in your lifetime? That'll be a question that goes to the jury as well.
Let me put it out there for both of you in terms of the timing of when this all happened, right? Which was just before the election. How much, right, in terms of timing, June, how important is that in kind of the structure of all of this and this legal case?
Because what you're saying is he did this right before the election to keep that information from the public, that the public has a right to know this. The public has a right to know this, and he kept it from the public. So it's very important that it was close to the election, I think. And, it's also very important what else was going on around him at the time, and what Michael Cohen, and though Michael Cohen, we've said many, many times is not the best witness. There's one thing about him. He has been consistent since he saw the light. He's been consistent, and also there's backing for his statements. There are the checks, and from what I heard his lawyers say, there is more than just those checks that are there to back up his statement. You also have the fact that Hope Hicks and Kellyanne Conway came to testify at the grand jury. So there may be backing from places that we don't even know. And it's not going to be just Michael Cohen, the star witness.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned all of those individuals. Professor Kastenberg, when you think about the people who are said to have testified and who have been coming to downtown New York and doing their testimony, who among them do you think is very key in the legal case here?
Yeah, you cannot, if you're the district attorney, you cannot have as your star witness Michael Cohen. No matter how honest he comes off, he's still a co-actor. And that's a big if about how honest he comes off. So I think that individuals who stayed with Mr. Trump till the very end, or who left, the few that left on a good note, but know something about this, and that may be Kellyanne Conway, are probably the star witnesses. Now, you know, when push comes to shove and someone is required to testify after being subpoenaed like Conway, they're often confronted with a tough choice: tell the truth or commit perjury. And telling the truth harms a friend, a benefactor, but I have confidence that DA Bragg has been able to show all of the witnesses that they've called to the grand jury what their prior statements have been and what their involvement in the particular charges that are now about to be unsealed have been. And so he probably boxed them into a corner where they really couldn't commit perjury, and they understood that. So it's those witnesses that'll be the strongest.
And it's not just watching the witnesses, it's also the unfolding of evidence. The unsealing of the indictment doesn't give us that much intel into the evidence that's going to be unfolding in the months to come here. Professor, in June, I want to get your take on this as well, but starting with you, Professor, can you talk about what you're going to be looking for as the evidence comes out here to determine whether it rises to the level?
Well, you know, a lot. So circumstantial evidence is enough to prove intent in the law. You don't have to have what's known as direct evidence. And so circumstantial evidence, the way we tell juries how it works is if you hear noise at night on your roof and, you know, the ground is wet in the morning, you can conclude on your own experience that it rained. A lot of what goes on with political type cases, like I should say corruption type cases, is based on circumstantial evidence, with the exception of the direct evidence being the money transfer records. And so everything we've talked about so far, it was on the eve of the election or in close proximity to the election when these payoffs occurred. They probably were reported as something other than what they were, you know, in terms of a loss and the like. Those things we build up and see how big of a mountain the circumstantial evidence is to prove knowledge and intent. And the more there is, the stronger the prosecutor's case is.
I wonder if, and the longer this goes on as we're waiting for the specifics on the individual charges, if you will, the narrative that we will ultimately get in this case against the former president, June, should we assume that each of these charges are being read out in court? Like, is there some assumption we can take from here, trying to understand, as we said, there are not cameras in the courtroom, trying to understand the process here?
You know, I hesitate to make any assumption. I mean, I would normally say, well, maybe they're reading out all the charges, but I can't imagine why the defense would want the charges to be read out.
It's not required, right? Yeah.
Can you
normally a defendant would waive reading of charges and wouldn't want them read out in open court, especially with the media sitting around there and reporting on the former president's mannerisms and the like. But you know, Mr. Trump has defied convention over and over again, and it wouldn't surprise me if he went the other way.
Well, the other thing that Trump is doing in the courtroom that does defy convention, like you said as well, and this is according to the Times, is the president of Trump's advisor, Boris Epshteyn, at the defense table in the courtroom. I wonder what you make of that, June. Do you?
What? I don't see him in that picture.
This is according to the Times, he's in the courtroom. This is Maggie Haberman, who follows Trump closely, and he's
so he's in the
table
courtroom.
with him.
He's in the courtroom.
She at the defense table in the courtroom.
Okay. Well, maybe there's a different picture that's going to come out because he's not in that picture. It's just his two lawyers. That would be and that would be very unusual to have someone who's not a lawyer at this particular arraignment.
You're talking about who's at the court?
This is from the New York Times. Maggie Haberman says Trump's advisor Boris Epshteyn is at the defense table in the courtroom.
Okay, so that's from reporting from inside, and that is obviously something that's coming from the New York Times. So we'll have to wait to see and get a little bit more information on that. Again, as we said, no cameras in the courtroom. There are some pool photos that are coming out, so we're getting some small shots of the actual process within. So as more information is known, it is interesting though, and I do wonder about the optics. And forgive me if we go a little bit to that area, but the president coming to New York City, once his hometown. That was yesterday, going to Trump Tower, and then, of course, coming downtown to New York for the arraignment and his pleading of not guilty against these charges. But it was interesting. It was a much more subdued Donald Trump. He was not, at least from what we've seen in terms of pictures, not surrounded by family. So it was a very different tone, June, from other times that we've seen the president.
Yes, and I can imagine that it was very different for him having, going in the motorcade down to criminal court, where I don't even know if he's ever been down to criminal court to turn himself in. It must have been quite an out-of-body experience. But, Manhattan, we had the mayor yesterday saying, everyone behave yourselves. And they were so prepared for this, so that, even the demonstrators, I think, were confined to the park across from the courthouse. And really, there was no holdup in traffic. Or usually, for example, when the UN's in session, I'm always like, where's that bus? Where's that bus? And things are like 57th Street is walled off and all the different, even though it's downtown. So none of that happened today or yesterday. It was just like another day for most New Yorkers. Unless you were down at the courthouse area, you didn't know what was happening. I'm sure everyone knew. But also, he hasn't come back to New York. He
for a long time.
For a long time. He didn't come very much during his presidency, but yet we had that, we have that Trump Tower, and it's been blocked off, and you can't walk on this street, and you can't. I think there's a lot of resentment, actually, for the former president.
And him not coming back to New York for a long time actually matters in terms of New York statute of limitations laws, correct?
Right, but yes, so the way that they would work the statute of limitations, if there's a statute of limitations, is, depending on when he's away. If he's away on business, then it wouldn't count toward the statute of limitations. I'm not an expert on this, so I don't know if Professor Kastenberg can help us. But the statute of limitations would be told while he was away, and so then when he comes back, it's untold. Do you know anything about that, Joshua?
Under New York criminal procedure laws and codes, that's generally true, but he could still raise an objection based on the statute of limitations violating his due process rights under the 14th Amendment on that point, to say, look, as President of the United States, of course I was away from New York, but I still owned property in it at the time and considered it my home. I mean, he'll make some very unique, his lawyers will make some very, very unique arguments that will have, merit to them, whether they work or not. And I suspect at the New York State level they won't, but whether they work or not, they'll be unique. I do want to go back to one comment on Epshteyn, if I can. And just to make it clear, he is an attorney. He's actually a graduate of my school at Georgetown, and where he earned his JD. Whether he's Mr. Trump's attorney for the purposes of this criminal matter is a different story, but he does have a law degree. And mainly his focus has been on finance and not criminal law, but he could be sitting at the table if he's a member of the legal team. That wouldn't be that unusual.
Okay, well,
that
that's good to
explains
get your
it.
thoughts.
That explains it. Yeah.
All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Radio. We are live, of course, here in our studio and on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals. I'm Carol Massner, along with Bloomberg's Madison Mills and June Grasso, who is host of Bloomberg Law and Bloomberg Radio, our legal analyst here at Bloomberg, and also Professor Joshua Kestenberg, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School, a former prosecutor. And again, the headline at this hour, former President Donald Trump pleading not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. He is still in downtown New York, and the arraignment continuing. We are still awaiting some of the specifics when it comes to those charges and piecing it together to understand the narrative of the case that is being brought by the New York District Attorney, Alvin Bragg. So we are awaiting those specifics. In the meantime, I do want to bring you back in, Professor Kestenberg, in terms of what the former president's lawyers might be arguing for at this point, whether it's a change of venue, getting the case out of Manhattan, a gag order. What are some of the things that might be discussed at this moment?
I suspect that a change of venue motion will be coming in the near future. And the reason is it's not necessarily that Manhattan's an unfriendly place, because I'm sure that you could find 12 disinterested adults who know very little about the facts of the case and an equal number of alternates in the largest city in the United States. I have no doubt that that's possible. And normally you exhaust jury members through the voir dire process before a motion like that is granted. But if they succeeded on a change of venue motion, that would probably speed things up. And so maybe the judge is going to be looking at it that way, that we don't have to, delay for a few months before we find a jury that could actually sit. There'll probably be motions to compel discovery. And what I mean by that is I have no doubt that Mr. Bragg will do everything he's required to do in turning over all evidence that is held by, the prosecutor's office in this case. But there'll probably be motions to go out and obtain further discovery and subpoena other witnesses and the like. And there'll be motions to dismiss that this is an illicit bootstrapping of misdemeanors into felonies, or grand jury misconduct. That'll probably be an allegation as well. So we're nowhere near actually a jury sitting and hearing evidence.
We'll go there in terms of the timeline. How long could this potentially go on?
I was just talking to my students about that and about the OJ trial in comparison. One of the lessons that trial judges, I think, learned from big trials, and the OJ trial is the first big one, is that a judge has to keep control of the process and not let counsel or the media or the public interest drive the length of the trial and docketing decisions. And so if the judge keeps control of the court and keeps control of the process, the judge will set standard timelines under New York criminal procedure and push this case forward as long as the defense counsel are ready to represent him and, fully able to represent Mr. Trump. And they've been given all of the evidence. With that said, in the normal course of events, this trial could be within 12 months. I doubt that it will, but it could be.
And that's on the long end, then, you're saying?
Short end.
Short end.
I would say short end. It took 16 months for the criminal tax fraud trial to get to trial. I don't know. It seems like that would be short to me.
And what does it mean, essentially, that while this case is going on and being dealt with, what does it mean to the other 4 or 5 cases that are out there?
He's going on trial in a few weeks
there.
Downtown New York with the E. Jean Carroll defamation lawsuit.
So I'm sorry for
jumping. No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Yeah, so that's one that, because it's wholly unrelated to this set of charges, that will not be part of the calculus in terms of slowing this trial down. The one that's part of the calculus, I think, is Attorney General Letitia James's civil trial against the family, because under New York law, mirrors federal law, and criminal trials take precedence. So I think what we're in is a position where Mr. Bragg's charges for this criminal trial will leapfrog over Attorney General James's civil trial.
Let me ask you this. because we were talking earlier today, in the civil case, in the E. Jean Carroll case, if Trump has to take the stand because it's a civil case and he can be called, well, what kind of a position is that going to put him in, having to testify in that case?
Well, they may make a motion to delay the Carroll case because of the very issue you raised.
I just want to point out, forgive me, Professor Kastenberg, for those, obviously this is radio and you are listening to us. We are also on YouTube and Bloomberg Originals, and we are seeing some pictures of the courtroom in downtown Manhattan where former President Donald Trump is being arraigned. It has been rather quiet outside a door with a bunch of New York City policemen. We just saw some activity, and it looked like a bunch of Secret Service men going into the courtroom. Okay. So President Donald Trump just walked through those doors. Okay, forgive me.
And no talking to the press again.
Well, very quiet, and so again, we await those specifics of those charges of falsifying business records against the former president. So again, thank you, team. The former president Donald Trump just leaving that room along with the Secret Servicemen. Again, these clips are short and quick. All right, I'm Carol Massar, along with Madison Mills, June Grosso, who covers law here at Bloomberg, and we've also got with us Professor Joshua Kastenberg at the University of New Mexico Law School. We are awaiting more specifics because that is what helps us figure what comes next. But I do wonder if the door, Professor Kastenberg, has now been opened, though, for more cases to come.
Well, you talk to the district attorney in Fulton County, and you listen to what Mr. Jack Smith has said at the special counsel at the Department of Justice, and they both assured the public that this indictment has nothing to do in any way in terms of influencing the timing of their decisions on how they go forward. Having said that, I could see how it might accelerate the district attorney's decision in Fulton County, Georgia, as to whether to go forward or not. And the reason is, whoever goes first gets the docket, right? Gets control of the calendar. And if you want to take Mr. Trump to trial, you're not only now contending with his own schedule in terms of campaigning and other legal matters like the Carroll lawsuit. Now you're going to have to deal with this Manhattan, criminal docket. And so I think the district attorney down in Fulton County is not going to want to add to that, having to contend with the Justice Department up in Washington, D.C., or down in Washington, D.C., rather. And so I think it will speed up a decision.
All right, folks, I just want to remind you, in terms of what we are seeing from a live footage of downtown Manhattan, the cars that brought the former president, Donald Trump, to the courthouse. The president is in the car. The motorcade is making its way, it looks like, back uptown, I'm assuming, to Trump Tower at this point. And so we can assume that the arraignment is over at this point. I am looking at our live blog, our Emily Birnbaum, who's a tech lobbying and policy reporter, noting that the former president, of course, exiting the courtroom after an unusually long hearing. A reporter yelled after him, "How did you plead, President Trump? How did you plead?" But again, these have been just quick snips, if you will, and shots of the former president. Again, putting in a plead of not guilty to what we know so far are 34 counts of falsifying business records. We are waiting. Obviously, the indictment has been unsealed, so his lawyers, his team, and those who were inside the courtroom know more on the specifics of those charges, but we are waiting some more to kind of get some insight in terms of what happens next. We should remind you that the president is expected, at least latest news is that he's expected to go back to Mar-a-Lago, Florida, and he's expected to this evening make some comments. And I've seen some pictures and photos of a big room set up in Florida. June Grosso,
I just want to say I think it speaks to how well the Secret Service work with the New York Police Department, and the New York Police Department, controlling the streets, that this went off without a hitch. There was absolutely no problem. There was no problem with protesters coming into the scene. I mean, it really went off without a hitch, and I think that's a testament to how well they work together and how this can be done.
Just want to remind everybody, we are awaiting a press conference with the district attorney here of Alvin Bragg, expected to hold a news conference, make some comments, and then from our understanding is to actually take some questions. So we are waiting that. As soon as that begins live in downtown Manhattan, we will take you there. Maddie, come on back in.
Well, it's just interesting to me that there wasn't more of a presence from protesters today. I think we saw about 1,000 people, both critics and supporters of former President Trump, especially given that his language on Truth Social was pretty, some would say, similar to the language we heard from him heading into the insurrection, really calling on his supporters to come out for him.
Well, that may be the problem. I mean, a lot of people who are firm Trump supporters who heeded his call to come to Washington, D.C., ended up behind bars, and others facing charges, and some others not. But so I think that there was a hesitancy, perhaps.
There's a precedent for coming out and protesting and supporting the former president.
And also I think there was the New York police and Secret Service. They were all listening to the chatter, and there was absolutely no chatter beforehand that led them to be concerned. So I think a lot of it has to do with January 6th, and that that meant that you don't want to get involved in that kind of a protest. It was going to be a peaceful protest, and Marjorie Taylor Greene went down there and came back, and nothing happened.
Help me in terms of misdemeanors, felonies. Professor Kastenberg, come on in. Can we make any assumption about the severity of these charges?
Well, I mean, they're charged as felonies, right? So the assumption is that they carry with them more than a year in prison if Mr. Trump were to actually be convicted of any one or more of them. And so that's the year, sort of the minimum, because that's the dividing line between felony and misdemeanor. In terms of, I wouldn't look at these charges, because we haven't read them yet, necessarily on the severity of them. I would look at them in terms of the effect that they have on the legal system. And what I mean by that is, how much money are we talking about here? Was there really subterfuge of the electoral process in the state of New York? What are New York taxpayers out of as a result of his conduct and the like? And so that's how I look at the charges, because the public looks at business fraud charges, like someone bilking a bank of $100 million. It doesn't really affect me. It's not like a murder case in the neighborhood, even though it does affect them.
June, I want to bring you in because you're reading something. This is coming from NBC.
NBC is reporting that former President Donald Trump's indictment includes conspiracy charges. So, Joshua, that would be along the lines of conspiracy, and then you'd expect that talking indictment that we were discussing before.
Now, again, we have not confirmed that, but this is what NBC is reporting.
Well, so conspiracy to commit an offense and committing the offense are two different things. And in this case, charging a crime as conspiracy makes an easier burden of proof on the prosecutor. So what I mean by that is, you don't have to prove that Mr. Trump specifically did A, B, and C. You only have to prove that people in the conspiracy do A, B, and C, and he knew about it, and he stood to benefit from it.
So that would be the other member of the conspiracy, we assume, would be his former fixer, Michael Cohen.
That's right. And Michael Cohen said something profound about a week or 2 weeks ago when he said, look, I went to jail for this, so I don't see what the big deal is. If somebody else does, I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
And if Michael Cohen's part of the conspiracy, and there's nothing he has to benefit from it. He's already served his time in jail, so no one can cut him a deal because that's been done. Or his time is over. I suppose that does make it easier to use him in a criminal trial against Mr. Trump than it would be if you didn't have the conspiracy charge in there.
So if the conspiracy charge changes the game for the prosecution, does that change the timeline? Does that change what we're looking for in terms of evidence? How does it change kind of how you are viewing the information that we're going to continue to get here, Professor?
It doesn't change the timeline, and it doesn't change the state of the evidence. What it means is that instead of, and there may be charges, obviously, that there are charges that are probably not conspiracy, that what you call direct charges. But what the government, what the prosecutor has to prove in that case, again, isn't that Trump directed all steps of the conspiracy. but rather he was part of it at some time and stood to benefit from its actions. In this case, people spending money on hush money and to silence, potential detractions from the campaign. He stood to benefit from that. If he knew it was going on, Mr. Bragg doesn't have to prove that Trump directed Michael Cohen to write this check or that check or do this money transfer, simply that he knew it was going on and he didn't stop it, and it was his money.
If we potentially, once we know the specifics, again, we have to kind of put the caveat out there. If Karen McDougal, the second woman, a former Playboy model, is part of the DA's case, how might that change things, Professor Kastenberg?
You just have the more hush money payments to more than one individual makes it more likely. It's that sort of accumulation that goes on.
You know what? If I may, we just got the District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, the 34-count felony indictment of the former president, and I'm looking at this as we speak. And as I do, we're also looking at a live shot downtown as we wait. The district attorney expected to make some comments and take some questions. But the grand jury of the County of New York, I'm reading from this, by this indictment accuses the defendant of the crime of falsifying business records in the first degree, talks about a violation of a penal law specifically, gives us some dates. The defendant in the County of New York and elsewhere on or about February 14, 2017, with intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime and aid and conceal the commission thereof, made and caused a false entry in the business records of an enterprise, to wit, an invoice from Michael Cohen dated February 14, 2017, marked as a record of the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust and kept and maintained by the Trump Organization. And it goes into a second count, a third count. It goes into all of the individual accounts here.
All 34, and they all say falsifying business records in the first degree. From my initial reading in on this, it looks like for all 34 of those counts, it's on falsifying business records in the first degree. I'm doing a quick search for a couple of keywords here, including conspiracy. Not seeing anything come up yet, but we're going to continue to read through this and get details out on that reporting from MSNBC as soon as we can. Professor, does that bring anything to top of mind for you that all 34 counts look like they are regarding falsifying business records in the first degree? Is that interesting to you?
Well, if there's no conspiracy charges in there, it means that the district attorney is actually going directly on Mr. Trump to say that Mr. Trump knew that he was committing a crime and he knew all aspects of the crime when he was committing it. You have an intent to defraud, so what you have here is a specific intent crime, and Mr. Bragg would have to be able to show that this falsification was done deliberately, that there was no accident. So it ups the burden of proof.
And it's not a talking indictment.
It looks very dry and very
very
to the
dry.
point.
I'm very surprised about this, and we really will have to listen very closely at the press conference, because this is just a recitation of each of the falsifying business records counts, and then
This is about
linking them-
accounting here, June.
Yeah, well,
in
right.
many ways.
But see, so it's a felony, though. They're charging it as a felony, so there you know that it's going to be connected to something else, but it's not specified what that is. So what you basically have is each false entry, one with an invoice from Michael Cohen, the date of it, and where it was recorded and kept and maintained by the Trump Organization. So that goes on and on and on. It's not really very interesting. It's not something that the average person would pick up and say, oh, now I understand why Alvin Bragg brought this.
Well, it doesn't feel like a narrative. So, are we misreading something, Professor Kastenberg?
Well, I don't have the indictment in front of me, but it doesn't sound like a narrative.
I will send it to you.
No, it's interesting. So this, again, now moves our priority and our focus. As we said, we are waiting for the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, to hold his press conference. He will make a statement and then is expected to take some questions. I'm looking at our live blog, our Bloomberg Live blog, and our thanks to our Nancy Lyons Sargent, who's sharing this with me. From August, this is a quote, from August 2015 to December 2017, The defendant orchestrated a scheme with others to influence the 2016 presidential election by identifying and purchasing negative information about him to suppress its publication and benefit the defendant's electoral prospects. In order to execute the unlawful scheme, the participants violated election laws and made and caused false entries in the business records of various entities in New York. The participants also took steps that mischaracterized for tax purposes the true nature of the payments made in furtherance of the scheme. So forgive me, guys, and team, help me out. This is coming from our live blog. This is coming from what? Do we know? And I don't know if Nancy knows. Is this, because I don't see this in the original indictment.
I'm looking at an announcement from the district attorney. Is that what you just read? Announced the indictment for falsifying New York business records in order to conceal damaging and unlawful activity from American voters before and after the 2016 election. Right. During the election, he employed a catch and kill. That is a statement from the district attorney's office.
And the prosecutor as well said, and this is from Eric Larson, our legal reporter, the prosecutor said Trump, quote, falsified New York business records to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election. So that's coming from the courtroom too.
Okay, all right. So forgive us, guys. We're going through as we're getting more of this information. We're getting more information about specifically the 34-count felony indictment of former President Donald Trump. And again, now I am looking at that release from Alvin Bragg, the district attorney, that just came out here. And as you said, that's kind of key here. So okay, let me read it so that it is clear to everyone and we can get maybe Professor Kastenberg to weigh in on it. Just once again, the people of the state of New York allege that Donald J. Trump repeatedly and fraudulently falsified New York business records to conceal crimes that hid damaging information from the voting public during the 26th presidential election. This is what June just read. Manhattan is home to the country's most significant business market. We cannot allow New York businesses to manipulate their records to cover up criminal conduct. As a statement of facts describes, the trail of money and lies exposes a pattern that the people allege violates one of New York's basic and fundamental business laws. As this office has done time and time again, we today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. And I know, Professor Kastenberg, we're trying to share information with you and you're reading and getting up to speed. Having heard that, that's coming straight from District Attorney Alvin Bragg. What are your thoughts?
Well, so my thoughts are in doing this quick perusal of the indictment. Not only is it not a narrative indictment, this is the kind of indictment that the public will be left wondering exactly what is underlying these charges. Like, for example, take a look at the first charge, and it says the defendant in the county of New York and elsewhere, and it gives a date, is with intent to defraud and intent to commit another crime, aid and conceal the commission thereof, and cause the false entry into the business records of an enterprise, to wit, an invoice from Michael Cohen. So we have no idea what the underlying crime is.
So let me jump in, because this release from Alvin Bragg gives us more of the narrative. In one instance, American media paid $30,000 to a former Trump Tower doorman who claimed to have a story about a child Trump had out of wedlock. In a second instance, AMI, American Media Incorporated, paid $150,000 to a woman who alleged she had a sexual relationship with Trump when Trump explicitly directed a lawyer who then worked for the Trump Organization as Trump's special counsel to reimburse American media in cash. The special counsel indicated to Trump that the payment should be made via a shell company, not by cash. AMI ultimately declined to accept reimbursement after consulting their counsel. American Media, which later admitted its conduct was unlawful in an agreement with federal prosecutors, made false entries in its business records concerning the true purpose of the $150,000 payment. And then there's a third instance which talks about it being 12 days before the presidential general election, the special counsel wired $130,000 to an attorney for an adult film actress, which we know is Stormy Daniels. So we're getting more of the narrative, if you will.
And I think what you can see in Alvin Bragg's statement where he's going here, because he said Manhattan is home to the country's most significant business market. We cannot allow New York businesses to manipulate their records to cover up criminal conduct. The trail of money and lies exposes a pattern that the people allege violates one of New York's basic and fundamental business laws. We today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. So there's no color coding on this. He's saying that this is a records violation and this is very important.
But also, if I'm understanding the legality correctly, and Professor, I want you to correct me on this, I think these are all Class E felonies, which is the lowest category of felony offense in New York. Does that change the weight of these charges at all, not just legally, but also in terms of public perception?
Well, I think it'll change the weight in terms of public perception because E-class felonies, that's the lowest level. It'll certainly give fodder for his attorneys and for members of Congress who are on his, on Mr. Trump's side to say, look, this is nothing more than converting a misdemeanor to a felony, so that even if it is a crime, Mr. Bragg is manipulating the system. But keep in mind that district attorneys can't make the law. They can't create criminal statutes. And so this is the criminal statute that was available. But it is, to use the old commentary, it's just one more thing that the district attorney is going to have to explain in court to a judge when a challenge arises.
It also goes on, and I'm going to read a little bit more from the press release because I feel like as we await this press conference with the District Attorney, Alvin Bragg, this gives us a little bit more of the story, the narrative, if you will. This letter from the District Attorney says, after winning the election, Trump reimbursed the special counsel through a series of monthly checks, first from the Donald J. Trump Revocable Trust, created in New York to hold the Trump Organization's assets during Trump's presidency, and later from Trump's bank account. In total, 11 checks were issued for a phony purpose. Again, this is coming from the district attorney. 9 of those checks were signed by Trump. Each check was processed by the Trump Organization and illegally disguised as a payment for legal services rendered pursuant to a non-existent retainer agreement. In total, 34 false entries were made in New York business records to conceal the initial covert $130,000 payment. Further, participants in the scheme took steps that mischaracterized, for tax purposes, the true nature of the reimbursements. Junior, thoughts?
Well, I'm still, I really want to go through this closer because Bragg may still be saying that there's a conspiracy here, that Donald Trump...
We don't see the words conspiracy.
No, we don't see the words conspiracy, but that may be in the background of this. I think this is still going to be what we said it was a long time ago, that it was going to be, linked to other crimes. And I do think that this is still going to be, that he may still charge a conspiracy, and we may hear that from Alvin Bragg himself, though it doesn't say it on the face of the indictment.
Yeah, but the signed checks, that's pretty direct evidence here, right, Professor?
It is. Yeah, it's direct evidence. But and going back to the conspiracy comment, the discussion we've had is, there's this due process requirement under the Constitution that an individual can only confront the plain language of the charges that are placed against him. So it's not like Mr. Bragg can come in and say, oh, I really meant this to be a conspiracy. The elements of these crimes are not conspiracy elements.
But let me ask you though, Professor Kastenberg, can that come though? Additional charges can still come, correct?
Absolutely, they certainly can, but they're not in this indictment right now.
So it is saying conceal the commission thereof.
Let me ask both of you, if I may, and Carol Master, along with Madison Mills here at Bloomberg headquarters. We're with June Grosso, host of Bloomberg Law, and Professor Joshua Kastenberg, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School. If it was another elected official who owned a business in New York, would we consider it as serious? Is that fair? June, would a case like this be brought? Is it just a normal kind of business case?
They have brought, I think, 100 of these kinds of cases.
That's what I thought.
This one is a little bit souped up. So they're going to come out probably and say, this is what we do. This is how we've done this before. And, whether it was Donald Trump or someone else, we're going to prosecute them. But I'm just curious to hear, because I'm seeing a different, you know what? I'm seeing a different indictment now. The one that we had access to is not the one that I'm reading now. Okay. There's a different one. All right, so this one states that there's more background. There's the scheme, the catch and kill scheme. There's the Trump Tower meeting, suppressing the doorman's story, suppressing the woman's account. I don't know what we had before, but it was not the right one. So let me look through this because it's much, much longer. It's 12 pages and it's more along the lines of also, yes, the conspiracy is here. So
Do you
this is
think,
the
are you
one-
looking at the statement of facts?
No,
Or you're looking at the
I'm
indictment?
looking at the indictment. Which the statement of facts, yeah, in the so let me look at this. But this is says that he orchestrated a scheme with others to influence the 2016 presidential election by identifying and purchasing negative information about him to suppress its publication and benefit the defendant's electoral prospects. Right. There we have it. So the participants violated election laws and made and caused false entries in the business records of various entities in New York. Okay, so this is
the statement of facts. So what we read before was not incorrect. It was the actual indictment. Yep. This is the statement of facts. So there
right,
are
okay.
And then the clarification came out when the district attorney Alvin Bragg put out his press release, his statement, which included both the indictment and statement of facts. So forgive me, June, but continue. So the statement.
So I'm just saying this is more along the lines of what we were anticipating.
This is the narrative.
It would be. This is the narrative. Yeah. They talk about the Trump organization and they talk about the catch and kill scheme. During and in furtherance of his candidacy for president, the defendant and others, there you have the conspiracy, agreed to identify and suppress negative stories about him. So 2 parties to this agreement have admitted to committing illegal conduct in connection with the scheme, as Joshua was talking about before. In August 2018, Lawyer A pleaded guilty to 2 federal crimes involving illegal campaign contributions and subsequently served time in prison. I think we know who Lawyer A is. That's Michael Cohen. Yeah. And in addition, American Media, which we were talking about, the National Enquirer, admitted in a non-prosecution agreement that it made a payment to a source of a story to ensure that the source did not publicize damaging allegations about the defendant. And then they talk about the defendant meeting with Lawyer A and meeting with the National Enquirer's chief executive officer and saying that talking about how killing this before stories were published, suppressing the doorman story, suppressing woman 1's account. This is a speaking indictment. Suppressing woman 2's account.
There's a lot of information
here. There's
here.
a lot of information
this is the
about
detail.
this and things that I hadn't heard before. And but maybe people who have been covering this repeatedly did. But also the investigation into Lawyer A and the defendant's pressure campaign. And they talk about a search warrant on Lawyer A, that's Michael Cohen's residence and office. And in the months that followed, the defendant and others engaged in a private and public pressure campaign to ensure that Lawyer A, Michael Cohen, did not cooperate with law enforcement in the federal investigation. This is something I haven't heard before. I mean, I've heard Michael Cohen talk about this, but I haven't heard it in relation to this indictment.
So here's another thing. Ultimately, with pressure mounting and the election approaching, the defendant agreed to pay off and directed Lawyer A, Michael Cohen, to proceed. Lawyer A discussed the deal with the defendant and the Trump Organization CFO. The defendant did not want to make the $130,000 payment himself and asked Lawyer A, Michael Cohen, and the Trump Organization CFO to find a way to make the payment. After discussing various payment options with the Trump Organization CFO, Lawyer A, Michael Cohen, agreed he would make the payment. Before making the payment, Lawyer A confirmed with the defendant that the defendant would pay him back. I mean, they are making the connections. They are trying to piece together the conversations that were had to show that the defendant here, the former President Donald Trump, certainly had knowledge and the specifics of exactly what was going on here.
And this also draws the connection between, because the big question I had is how do you transfer over falsifying of business records charge, which is a misdemeanor, to a felony? The statement of facts suggesting to me, and Professor and June, feel free to correct me here, this suggests to me that the second crime here is a violation of election law that triggers the felony charge here. Professor, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
So that election law piece feels very critical here, and that's partially why we're hearing so much about that in the statement of facts from Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg there. Another thing that I think is interesting that we already talked about, Carol, you mentioned the statement about Manhattan being home to the country's most significant business market. I wonder if this is a move from Bragg to distance the trial from the political impact here, if this is a move to say this isn't necessarily purely politics. This isn't an anti-former President Trump thing. This is about Manhattan as a financial hub. Professor, do you anticipate that being kind of the motivation behind having that piece about Manhattan as a financial hub at the top of this statement of facts?
Yes, but I don't think that that's going to diffuse the political nature of this trial. I mean, Mr. Trump's supporters and some others are going to continue to, return to the idea that this is a politically motivated trial and it wouldn't happen to anybody else. And they'll probably come up with a litany of politicians who've committed misconduct and have avoided trials in the past. And to be able to do that. On the other hand, a district attorney has to not only protect the people of New York City in who they are and, as they walk the streets, as they wake up, but he also has to protect the commercial interests of the people of New York. And so that's what his answer is going to be. We have laws, and we have laws to protect the commerce of New York as those laws protect the people of New York. And when they're broken, we have a duty to prosecute. And that's not going to satisfy those people who are convinced that this is a political, motivated trial. But it may satisfy the middle of the country.
All right, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Radio on this Tuesday, April 4th. As you know, at this hour, we have seen former President Donald Trump go downtown to Manhattan. He has pled guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. We are getting a lot more information about the specifics of it, the narrative, thanks to the statement of facts, along with the indictment that has been released by the district attorney's office. The district attorney Alvin Bragg is expected to hold a press conference in downtown New York. We are looking at a live shot and seeing certainly a mulling of activity. And as soon as he begins speaking, we will take you down there to listen to his comments. He is expected to take some questions. In the meantime, in the studio, Carol Master, along with Madison Mills of Bloomberg, along with June Grosso, Bloomberg News legal analyst and host of Bloomberg Law on Bloomberg Radio, and Professor Joshua Kastenberg, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School and a former prosecutor. And forgive me if I may interrupt you, but Professor Kastenberg, what will you be listening for in particular at this press conference by the DA?
Well, he's going to get asked some very difficult questions in terms of politics, and I'm looking for how well he maneuvers the questions back to this is really a matter of law, it's not a matter of politics. Because it's inevitable. I'm sure he's prepared for this moment. But it's inevitable to me those questions are going to come up. The other one is they're going to ask him about what witnesses said in the grand jury, and he's going to have to go back and say, look, I'm not at liberty to, under New York law, I'm not at liberty to divulge what witnesses have already testified to, and I don't want to prejudice this trial by doing so.
June, what are you going to be listening out for?
Well, I think his explanation, basically, of why he brought this, and I mean, that's something that Joshua said, but it's sort of very important for him to answer the allegations that have been raised that this is just a trumped-up charge and that it is directed to the president, the former president, and we're going to certainly see motions to dismiss based on, favoritism by the prosecutor. I mean, targeting Trump. That's going to be one of the motions to dismiss, I'm sure. And also the way he has formed this indictment where misdemeanors get hooked with felonies. So I think that that's all going to be part of the motions to dismiss. I'm just interested if he talks about any of the charges that have been laid against him, as far as the fact that this case seemed to it was revived and brought back and revived and brought back, called a zombie case by Michael Pomerantz, who was one of the prosecutors who left the office because he was disappointed that they didn't bring charges. So it'll be interesting to see whether he talks about that and whether this is a different form of an indictment than what was being considered before. I mean, I just don't know how much he'll answer because, if you've ever seen him speak, he can sometimes be very sort of quiet about his explanations and not really give fulsome explanations.
Yeah.
So he may just say, It's in the indictment. Read the indictment. That may be part of it, too.
Do you think there's any chance of him bringing up any of the other cases against Trump as well? No, June?
I don't think that he would ever talk. I think it would be out of line for him to talk about any of the other cases. What people are saying, and what I think he'll say is, this is the case that we're concentrating on. We have nothing to do with what's happening in Georgia. We have nothing to do with the special counsel. I think it was surprising when, in that interview, Cy Vance, the former prosecutor, the former Manhattan DA for years, said that they asked him, federal prosecutors asked him to drop the charges or not to go forward, and he went along with that.
Yeah.
I thought that Joshua, is that surprising? I thought that was amazing that he decided to do what the feds asked him to do.
Well, yeah, I think that there has to be more detail, about what that discussion was for me to give you any specific on why I think he might have done it. But I will agree that I was surprised that Vance agreed to do that, because you have some, at least percolating in the media over the last 4 years, 5 years, major sort of banking type fraud allegations that have been made that have just disappeared and gone nowhere.
I just want to go back to our Bloomberg Live blog as we await the District Attorney Alvin Bragg to begin making his statement. It looks like prosecutors had asked for a January trial date, but Trump's attorneys complained that such a schedule was, quote, patently unfair to their client because they haven't yet been able to review discovery in the case. The judge said the defense's objection was, quote, reasonable, given they haven't been able to review evidence, and said he would, quote, like to move ahead as expeditiously as possible without delay. The judge said that despite the disagreement over Trump's rhetoric, he had no intention of issuing a gag order at this point, calling that, quote, the most serious and least tolerable infringement on the First Amendment. The judge said that was especially true for someone running for the presidency. So just a little bit more in terms of color. The charges, the statement of facts filed with the indictment, say the former president, quote, orchestrated a scheme with others to influence the 2016 presidential election. Specifically, in order to execute the unlawful scheme, the participants violated election laws and made and caused false entries in the business records of various entities in New York. I would say, Professor Kastenberg, that in a nutshell, that's the heart of the case, and that's what's got to be proven very clearly here.
Yeah, absolutely right. And I'd like to go back on the gag order for a moment. You know, there's a graduated type of remedy that a judge can impose on a defendant or on others. And the gag order is really severe because you're asking someone to have you're asking a judge to curtail someone's free speech rights. And when that individual is campaigning for re-election, I'm not sure the judge even has the authority to issue a gag order that would be able to curb someone's, electoral behavior that they need to do to move forward with their own election chances. And so the judge was very wise to say, no, you only issue a gag order when someone violates court orders or is disruptive in the court. We don't have that. We haven't even come close to that.
I just want to go back to our Bloomberg Live blog, if I may. Carol Master, along with Maddie Mills, June Grosso, and Professor Kastenberg, we are awaiting the DA, Alvin Bragg, to make his statement. But our Emily Birnbaum, who was outside, he said another of former President Trump's attorneys, this is Todd Blanche. He's the former federal prosecutor. He was added to Trump's legal team. That news was confirmed just yesterday, saying, forgive me, this blog is now moving along here. I hate when that happens. Basically saying that the judge was responding to Trump's lawyers, saying the disputed remarks were the result of Trump being frustrated, upset. Forgive me, that's not where I was looking to. Defense attorney said it would be patently unfair to not allow their client to speak about his case.
Well, and what's interesting on that, Carol? Yep, go ahead.
Let me just go.
Yep.
Okay, so Blanche speaking outside of the courthouse after the indictment was unsealed. Quote, we're going to fight it. He said, Blanche said Trump is, quote, frustrated, he's upset, but he's motivated. And forgive me again, a live blog moves because it's live. So again, we are awaiting District Attorney Alvin Bragg to make some comments. Come on in, Maddie.
No. Sorry about that, Carol. I was just going to say that what's interesting interesting about the gag order piece is that Trump's attorney kind of commented on this as well, telling reporters that Trump is not going to post on social media about the case and that he is committed to that. That would be a different move from Trump, obviously based on his history, but also specifically in relation to what he's already posted on Truth Social about the trial, asking his supporters and protesters to come out today. I also want to mention that Trump has boarded the plane at LaGuardia heading back to Palm Beach County towards Mar-a-Lago as well. So we have some footage of that. But that'll be interesting to see whether or not Trump, I guess, follows the statements from his attorney saying that he's not going to be posting on social media. June, do you anticipate that?
I sort of doubt it, because he's never been quiet about anything before. There's a first time for everything, but even in the cases that he's the Weisselberg case and civil cases that he's been involved in before. I mean, he's been in legal process a long time. I think there was an account that he had 4,000 different cases, civil cases, before his presidency. So he has not been quiet, but maybe here it's a criminal case. Maybe they've sat him down and talked to him and said, you can't do this anymore. I mean, he even talked about the Supreme Court and the Ninth Circuit. So we'll see if this hits him, because it's a criminal case, and it would be a real change. It would be a real change in, the way he's used to acting.
Let me ask you something, because this judge, right, the New York State Supreme Court Justice Juan Merchan, he, from what I understand, right, presided over the state's case against Alan Weisselberg, the former Trump Organization CFO, who pled guilty to tax fraud in August. Weisselberg went on to testify against 2 Trump Organization units convicted of tax fraud in December, also under the same judge. This is a judge who has been very entrenched, it feels like, in all things Trump Organization. Professor Kastenberg, how does that affect potentially the process here, help the process, or hinder the process?
Well, look, if the question is an experienced judge, obviously an experienced judge is more likely to help move this process along and make wiser decisions on such matters like the gag rule. And, I want to mention this as we're talking. I've gotten some emails from angry people saying, he's innocent and, calling me a few names. Of course, the emails aren't really, they don't say who they are. They may be bots from Moscow, for all I know. But having said that, I want to make 2 things clear. One is we're talking about potentials here. And under the law, Mr. Trump is innocent until the prosecution proves him guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Number 2, and this is important about his rights that every citizen has, his First Amendment rights. There's another right he has because he's facing charges that's embedded in our Bill of Rights. And that is the right to a public trial and the right to put on a complete defense. And if he believes that it's in his best interest to find witnesses by going public, even though it may be terrible to do so in the long term, but if he believes it's in his best interest to do so, he has that right to do so, and the court is not going to stand in the way of that.
So, and it's interesting, and forgive me if you guys have said this, but I'm just, as I go through this live blog, prosecutors said they weren't seeking a gag order in the case at this point, but asked for a protective order that would limit Trump's ability to share evidence about his case due to recent public comments. The judge told the parties to work on such an order and come back to him. The prosecutor advising the court of the state's concerned that Trump had repeatedly made what they described as threatening comments on social media, targeting people involved in the case and their families. The prosecutor cited Trump's posting of a photo of himself holding a baseball bat next to another image of Bragg. These are the things that everyone's been talking about.
We've been talking about that all day, about the way he attacked Alvin Bragg and Alvin Bragg's wife. And also, I mean, that photo was stunning and so inappropriate that it's hard to sort of say anything about it. But so that's why I think that there's a lot more than just, we want a gag order. We want him not to do anything to affect this case. And remember, in the January 6th hearings, there were also allegations that some of the witnesses were intimidated. And what's interesting in this indictment is this piece where they talk about how there was pressure on Michael Cohen not to testify. Not to turn state's evidence. I mean, that's really interesting, and I didn't think that that would be part of this. So, all these prosecutors, if they're looking at this, they're thinking about what else might be done to other witnesses, as allegedly was done to Michael Cohen to stop him from being a state's witness.
All right, everybody, you are listening and watching Bloomberg Radio on this Tuesday. Carol Master along with Bloomberg Quick Takes, Madison Mill. We're here with June Grosso, of course, host of Bloomberg Law and Bloomberg Radio, and Professor Joshua Kastenberg, professor at the University of New Mexico Law School, former prosecutor, on a day where, history is certainly being made when it comes to the history of our country. Former President Donald Trump pleading not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. We're learning that there's a lot more to it. We're learning about the narrative. We're also watching a live shot for those who are watching us on YouTube and on Bloomberg Originals of downtown courthouse, where the district attorney, Alvin Bragg, is expected to make a statement, answer some questions. We're trying to look at the pictures because there's been some visuals put up, if you will, that I think are going to explain some of this narrative. But as soon as he begins speaking, we will take you there live. It's an interesting process. I do wonder, too, June, of what happens here. Does it ultimately affect future trials, or every case is kind of its own entity?
Every case is its own entity, particularly because in the trials that we're considering, but the possible criminal charges, totally different facts. I mean, here you have, this is an isolated fact. This is about payments made before the election. The Georgia case is about phone calls that were made after he lost the election to Joe Biden, and there is a lot of evidence based on that. Oh, by the way, I just want to mention that in this indictment, they do refer to audio of Michael Cohen and Donald Trump. So they did try to hook a lot of different things in there. And then the special counsel's investigation, one is about classified documents, the mishandling of classified documents. That's another issue. And then you have the January 6th part of the special counsel's investigation, yet another issue. So it's sort of it's mind-boggling to me that you could have one person and have all these different possible criminal cases of totally different things.
The one thing I do want to think about, and this has certainly come, where a lot of people have said, oh my goodness, everything's a mess. Can we believe this is happening? It's historical, unprecedented. At the same time, Professor Kastenberg, this is, if you will, democracy. It's messy sometimes, and it's working. And the legal process, when there are individuals where there are concerns and there are charges, they are brought, and the legal system goes its way and figures out whether or not there's an individual who's innocent or guilty. I mean, is it the legal system at work?
For those people who say this is a political trial and, it's this nefarious far left attempt to crush freedom, we're not going to convince them. But what I would say in that regard, most importantly, is here you have a DA and a grand jury that wasn't swayed by public pressure to go one way or the other. I suspect they did it on their own. And the other thing is, democracies are supposed to be able to withstand their leaders or their former leaders being charged with crimes.
Professor Kastenberg, forgive us. We want to take everybody to downtown New York, Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg now at the podium.
Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct. The defendant repeatedly made false statements on New York business records. He also caused others to make false statements. The defendant claimed that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. This simply was not true. And it was a false statement that the defendant made month after month in 2017. April, May, June, and so on through the rest of the year. For 9 straight months, the defendant held documents in his hand containing this key lie, that he was paying Michael Cohen for legal services performed in 2017. And he personally signed checks for payments to Michael Cohen for each of these 9 months. In total, the grand jury found there were 34 documents with this critical false statement. Why did Donald Trump repeatedly make these false statements? The evidence will show that he did so to cover up crimes relating to the 2016 election. Donald Trump, executives at the publishing company American Media Incorporated, Mr. Cohen, and others agreed in 2015 to a catch and kill scheme. That is, a scheme to buy and suppress negative information to help Mr. Trump's chance of winning the election. As part of this scheme, Donald Trump and others made 3 payments to people who claimed to have negative information about Mr. Trump. To make these payments, they set up shell companies, and they made yet more false statements, including, for example, in AMI, American Media Incorporated's business records. One of the 3 people that they paid to keep quiet was a woman named Stormy Daniels. Less than 2 weeks before the presidential election, Michael Cohen wired $130,000 to Stormy Daniels' lawyer. That payment was to hide damaging information from the voting public. The participant scheme was illegal. The scheme violated New York election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. The $130,000 wire payment exceeded the federal campaign contribution cap, and the false statements in AMI's books violated New York law. That is why Mr. Trump made false statements about his payments to Mr. Cohen. He could not simply say that the payments were a reimbursement for Mr. Cohen's payments to Stormy Daniels. To do so, to make that true statement, would have been to admit a crime. So instead, Mr. Trump said that he was paying Mr. Cohen for fictitious legal services in 2017 to cover up actual crime committed the prior year. And in order to get Michael Cohen his money back, they planned one last false statement. In order to complete the scheme, they planned to mischaracterize the repayments to Mr. Cohen as income to the New York State tax authorities. The conduct I just described, and that which was charged by the grand jury, is felony criminal conduct in New York State. True and accurate business records are important everywhere, to be sure. They are all the more important in Manhattan, the financial center of the world. That is why we have a history in the Manhattan DA's office of vigorously enforcing white-collar crime. My office, including the talented prosecutors you saw at arraignment earlier today, has charged hundreds of felony falsifying business records. This charge, it can be said, is the bread and butter of our white-collar work. And fraud presents itself in all different forms here in Manhattan. We have charged falsifying business records for those who violated federal bank secrecy laws. We have charged falsifying business records for those who were seeking to cover up sex crimes. And we have brought this charge for those who committed tax violations. At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable. As this office has done time and time again, We today uphold our solemn responsibility to ensure that everyone stands equal before the law. No amount of money and no amount of power changes that enduring American principle. I'll now take questions.
So we're going to take a limited number of questions. There are no follow-up questions. One question per reporter. I will call on you. And again, we have limited time. Thank you. The first question will be Rick.
Thank you for giving us a CNN. Why now? I mean, some argue that this is a political move. You're not known to be a political person. The floodgates are going to go into
We conducted a thorough and rigorous investigation, as we're known to do, at the Manhattan District Attorney's Office. I've been doing this for 24 years and am no stranger to rigorous, complex investigations. I bring cases when they're ready. Having now conducted a rigorous, thorough investigation, the case was ready to be brought, and it was brought.
Mr. Bragg, the indictment says that there were 34 false business records. And they were done to conceal another crime, but the indictment does not specifically say what those crimes were. We are assuming, perhaps, that they might be election-related. I'm wondering if you can specify what laws were also broken.
Sure. So let me say as an initial matter, the indictment doesn't specify that because the law does not so require. In my remarks, I mentioned a couple of laws, which I will highlight again now. The first is New York State election law, which makes it a crime to conspire to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. I further indicated a number of unlawful means, including more additional false statements, including statements that were planned to be made to tax authorities. I also noted the federal election law cap on contribution limits.
But why weren't there those crimes charged? Why wasn't he charged with those crimes?
Well, I'm not going to go into our deliberative process on what was brought. The charges that were brought were the ones that were brought. The evidence in the law is the basis for those decisions.
You had expressed a year ago that you had some reservations about the case's readiness. Can you talk to us about what were some of the questions in your mind that needed to be answered in order to bring a case of this magnitude?
I'm not going to go chapter and verse into any thinking. What I will say is, I believe the time period you're talking about, I've been in office for a couple of months. The investigation, in my view, was not concluded into the conduct in particular that is the basis for the charges today. Since that time, we've had more evidence made available to the office and opportunity to meet with additional witnesses. As I said earlier, I've been doing this for 24 years. I don't bring cases prior to a thorough and rigorous investigation. Now, having done so, the case has been brought.
Mr. Bragg, Garrett Hake with NBC News. Your predecessor took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Federal prosecutors took a hard look at this case and decided not to charge it. Do you believe you have new evidence that led you to decide to charge this, or why now?
Well, as I just mentioned, we have had available to the office additional evidence that was not in the office's possession prior to my time here. And as to your part of your question about the federal, we have a distinct and strong, I would say profound, independent interest in New York State. This is the business capital of the world. We regularly do cases involving false business statements. The bedrock, in fact, the basis for business integrity and a well-functioning business marketplace is true and accurate record keeping. That's the charge that's brought here, falsifying New York State business records. I'm not going to go beyond the plain language statement of facts, which I think speaks for itself. So the charge is falsifying business records. The charge requires, as I specified criminal conduct that was concealed. One of the concealed crimes we allege is New York State election law. I sort of went through in our statement of facts, which I think many of you have in front of you, goes through things including text messages, emails, contemporaneous phone records, multiple witnesses. All of that will be, as you saw in the fall, borne out in a public courtroom in downtown Manhattan.
Last question is Jonah.
I'm glad you put your finger on that, because it's not just about one payment. It is 34 business records, 34 false statements in business records, and we're concealing criminal conduct. The earlier question about New York State election law, when I talked about conspiracy to promote a candidacy by unlawful means. Those unlawful means, we allege, include the conduct set forth in the statement of facts, which is additional false statements separate and apart from the charged ones in AMI documents, planned false statements to taxing authorities. It is not just that one $130,000 wire payment. Thanks so much.
Any comment about any incitement of violence by former president?
Well, he's done. That is the District Attorney Alvin Bragg in downtown New York making his statement. He spoke for about 6 minutes and then took some questions for about 7 minutes more, so rather brief. But I will say the indictment, along with the statement of facts, it's rather extensive, especially the SOF, in terms of laying out the narrative of this case. You know the headline. And again, you are listening to Bloomberg Radio. Carol Master along with Madison Mills, June Grosso of Bloomberg Law. And again, President Trump, former President Trump, arraigned earlier in New York court, putting in a plea of not guilty to 34 counts of falsifying business records. The DA specifically talking about that is the main charges, felonies in the state of New York when done to conceal other crimes, no matter who you are. Those were the words of the district attorney, and getting specifically into not only the counts of falsifying business records, but also covering up other crimes and putting pressure on others, if you will, to prevent other folks like Michael Cohen from coming forward and sharing more information. June, your thoughts?
Well, I thought that his statement, where he explained everything, was sort of like a very short opening statement that you might give to a jury, a prosecutor might give to a jury. He explained it very simply, and he emphasized that it wasn't just one false statement, and it wasn't just once. It was for 9 straight months. And he said April, May, June, the false statement, and then the cover-up. And you know what they say about cover-ups, Carol?
Right.
The problem is always with the cover-up.
Right.
So, and he went through, I mean, he told it very simply, and it made a lot of sense the way he presented it. And he also emphasized, as you mentioned, that this is a kind of crime that we prosecute in New York all the time, falsifying business records. And then he gave some examples of falsifying business records in connection with another crime. So I think he tried to take on his critics without actually addressing his critics. And he also, for one of the questions, he said, when it's ready. I'll bring the indictment when it's ready. He said, we bring cases that way. And that was his answer to the critics who say, why are you bringing this now? Why aren't you waiting for Georgia? Why aren't you waiting for the special counsel? Well, I called the grand jury. I gave the grand jury the evidence, and we investigated, and this was it. We came to the conclusion. And I think that answers a lot of questions from people. So I thought I was impressed by his press conference. I thought he did very well explaining a difficult situation he's been put in.
It didn't seem, though, it did not seem, though, that he had some huge, big shoe to drop to announce in terms of new evidence that he had received. It was more, we've looked at some of the evidence, and I'm going to bring these charges because we are in one of the world's biggest financial hubs, and white-collar crime matters here and everywhere.
It might not have been new evidence, but I think putting it together the way it is in the statement of facts, and the way they presented the conspiracy, I think the way they put it together was very powerful. Whereas we may have known all of these facts. I didn't know all of these facts, but I haven't, I didn't know all of these facts about some of the allegations of what Trump covered up, some of the stories. I had heard Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal, but the doorman's involved here. There's a lot more involved here than I knew personally. So that was a surprise to me, and I think that the way they put it together was very powerful and makes sense.
And it sounds like, and certainly the DA laying this out about the $130,000 payment exceeding campaign contribution caps, and the false statements. I mean, what's going to be, it sounds like, June, very key is the New York election law, making that connection. Here we were, a couple of weeks before that 2016 election, and that suppressing information, that, catch and kill, if you will, and what it would have meant if that information had gotten out so close to an election potentially. Right. That's going to be a key connection. Yeah. And then understanding by the jurors what that means.
I feel like from the way this is laid out that they already in their minds have their case laid out, how they're going to present it and what they're going to need to show to a jury. I mean, they have their witnesses, they have a lot of trial prep ahead of them, but it's the defense now that's going to be the first thing we're going to see is motions, I believe, from the defense trying to get the case dismissed. And I think that I can't imagine any of those motions actually succeeding because the judge will want this to go to a jury. He's not going to want to be the judge who dismissed the case against Donald Trump, I don't think. So, and also from what I know about what the possible motions to dismiss might be, or change of venue, for example, I think they'll have a hard time, an uphill battle getting this dismissed before trial. I think this will actually go to trial.
One last question, timetable. What do we know now?
Well,
or we don't know.
We know that the judge set a date of, was it December 5th for the next, fourth for the next motions? Yep. And we heard that he wants to move it ahead. He wants to move it ahead. So, but I think that despite the fact that he may want to move it ahead, I think there'll be a lot of delaying tactics and also just a need for more time from the defense. And so he might not be able to move it as fast as he wants to, but I don't think it's going to take as long as as the other case did.
All right. So appreciate it, June, as always, when you weigh on this. June Grosso, Bloomberg News legal analyst, host of Bloomberg Law, weeknights at 10 p.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg Radio. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday. Carol Massar along with Madison Mills. Don't forget, we had a stock market day, which we saw stocks halting a 4-day rally. We saw sell-off in those bank names again. So let's get to that and get a check on those top business stories and how the markets wrapped up on this Tuesday. Over to you, Charlie Pellet.
Thank you very much, Carol Master of the Dow. The S&P, NASDAQ all closed lower today, right to the numbers. S&P was down 23, ending the day at 4,100.6. We had the S&P down by about 0.6% today. Dow Industrials also down by 0.6%, down 198 points, while NASDAQ dropped 63 points, a drop there of 0.5%. The 10-year yield, 3.33%. The 2-year, 3.82%. Spot gold at 2,021, a rally today of $36.60 on the precious metal. That represents a gain of 1.85%. Crude, an update there, now at 80.85 a barrel. West Texas Intermediate crude today up by 0.6%. Treasuries climbed as data on job openings bolstered bets that the Federal Reserve is about to wrap up its tightening campaign. Well, as for the market outlook, Ross Mayfield is investment strategy analyst at Baird, and he was interviewed on Bloomberg Television.
I'm not one who thinks that we retest the lows. I think that the resilience in the face of all the headwinds we've seen is actually a bullish signal. But at the same time, I do think what the market is pricing right now is this kind of Goldilocks crisis where the banking sector issues are enough to get the Fed to pause, but not so much as to kind of freeze lending and really harm the economy.
And we cannot ignore the banks today. The KBW Bank Index was down by 2% among specific bank stocks. JP Morgan Chase down 1.3%. Citigroup down 1.3% as well. Bank of America down 2.1%. Wells Fargo today down by 2.4%. So again, recapping, it was a down day for the Dow, the S&P, and NASDAQ. S&P finished 23 points lower today, down by 0.6%, with the 10-year yielding 3.33%. I'm Charlie Pelleton. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. You are listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week on this Tuesday, April 4th. Carol Master along with Madison Mills live in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. The unsealing of that indictment against former President Donald Trump, obviously our top national story, and we've spent a lot on it. We appreciate your patience as we were working through the headlines, the indictment, the statement of facts, because it was a little crazy in terms of some of the information. In the meantime, as you heard from Charlie, the stock market halting a 4-day rally. We did see banks coming under some pressure. I'm so glad that we have our next guest because he's got a technical take on the markets, always looks at things really smart and deeply. Randy Watts is back with us, Chief Investment Strategist at O'Neill Global Advisors. Lucky for us, he's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. It is so nice to have you here in studio. How are you?
I'm great, and it's nice to see you in person now that the pandemic has wound down and see a familiar face.
Well, can I say it's normal on a day where we were just saying before we got going that, it feels like we watch a lot of reality TV, but this isn't, reality TV. This is the real world, and it's interesting. Things keep coming at us politically, economically, monetary policy-wise. How do you make sense of it? Someone who looks at things technically, how do you think about all of these issues that continue to come at us?
I think, unfortunately, the extreme bipartisan nature of the political system right now is going to continue, at least for the foreseeable future. That's something investors have to deal with. Right now, we have a mixed government, obviously. Historically, the market actually does okay under that scenario.
Right.
And so I really try to stay focused on what's going on with the economy and what's going on with companies.
So not super concerned about the Trump situation, even though markets like predictability, right? And this is a little bit unpredictable.
I think the market's much more concerned about what's going on with the economy, what's going on with the Fed, what's going on with the financial system, and don't want to digress too far into politics, but I don't think that's what's driving stocks right now.
All right, so tell us what you think is driving stocks. At a year where, like you said, we just went through, I don't know whether to call it a bank crisis, but we did have the collapse of 3 banks here in the United States. We're continuing to watch to see if there's other shoes that drop, whether it's in commercial real estate or what have you. What does this market show you, tell you about maybe what's to come?
I think the market's focused on 3 things right now. It's focused on what the Fed's going to do, and we should note that the odds of another rate increase in May has actually fallen to 40%. So now the market is not expecting another rate increase in May.
You think the market's right on this?
I think it's very tough to say. I think it is kind of 50-50, not to dodge the question, but I think it's kind of up in the air. But I think it's clear that we are probably getting near the end of the Fed tightening cycle. I do think that the Fed...
Is that because of the volatility we're seeing in treasuries? What's the indication that tells you that? Or is it because of what we're hearing from the Fed?
I think it's a couple of things. I think inflation is starting to slow down.
Okay.
I think the economy is starting to slow down. I think the Fed has done an awful lot in a very short period of time, and at some point I think they're going to want to pause and see how that plays through the system. I think importantly, what is going on with the banks in the real world is very significant. There is a credit contraction going on. Remember, small banks make about 40% of the loans in the U.S., though in some areas like commercial real estate, they make closer to 70. And so that contraction of small business loans is going to have a big impact on the economy. That's just starting. The Fed's aware of that. I think they're going to want to see how that plays out.
But you're a technicals guy as well. So when you hear these big news events like the banking crisis, quote unquote, like the OPEC production cuts, do you weigh those heavily on how you're thinking about markets?
I do. I would say technically, a couple things to say. First is, I'd say the top thing for the market has been a very narrow market. So if you look at the QQQs, which represent the NASDAQ 100, right, they're up about 20% year to date. The equal weighted S&P is only up about 2%. So it's been a very narrow market. The market has not been as strong as it looks.
We haven't seen volume either on this, right?
Correct. And the market does not look as strong as it appears on the surface. That's the first point. The second point is, Once you do get, though, to the end of the Fed tightening cycle, and we can debate right now whether we've already seen the peak in 10-year yields. They've pulled back a lot. They've gone from basically 425 to 335 today at the close. That's a huge drop. Once 10-year yields peak, that's good for growth stocks and long-duration assets. And one of the things we're seeing happen in the market over the last 6 weeks or so is a shift away from cyclicality and back into growth. So I do think we could be in a situation where at the end of the year, maybe the economy's not quite as good as it is right now, but the Fed tightening cycle has ended, bond yields have come down, and people are feeling better about stocks.
Yeah, it's pretty remarkable. I mean, we've got now a 2-year easily back below 4%, 3.82 to be exact. Randy, having said that, do you think recession? Did you say recession?
I didn't say recession. I like how you set that up. I do think we're looking at a slower economy. I do think at some form of recession is likely. But let's remember, stocks normally bottom during the recession and start going up. They take a lot of the pain in front of the recession because they're a discounting mechanism.
Did we do that already?
We've done an awful lot of damage in the market over the last year. So, I mean, the S&P is down, what, roughly 9–10% over the last year.
Could we go lower, though, from here?
I think the thing everyone's really focused on in that sense is, are we going to go back and retest that October low? The October low was 34.91.
We've done some touch and go there.
We've gone down to around 37.64 was the December low. I don't know if we have to go all the way back and retest that October low. Right now, the market's been in kind of a trading range, and that trading range is being driven by what's going on with the Fed, and then the next thing to occur is going to be earnings season. And I do have a feeling that this earnings season, which starts on April 14th with the big banks reporting, though I will note the big banks should actually be okay because they're going to have an awful lot of deposit inflows. So I think those quarters may actually be kind of positive. But I think as we move through earnings season and we start to listen to some of the industrials and some of the consumer stocks, I do think estimates are going to come down. They've already started to come down. Bloomberg itself, in your intelligence bureau, is looking for -2% earnings growth for Q1. Used to be positive, now it's coming down. So I do think the one other negative the market has to kind of adjust to is that earnings have to get reset for the new reality on the economy.
I have to say that one of the conversations I think is smart to have about our era right now is just this reset post-pandemic, right? We had a normal economy, we had a pandemic, we had an incredible amount of stimulus that came into on a global basis, right? And then we're trying to figure out work from home, we're trying to figure out real estate needs, we're trying to figure out a lot of things that got impacted by the pandemic and kind of what the reality is. And that's the same thing when it comes to valuations or earnings expectations. And there's, do you know what I'm saying? Like, it's just kind of a big macro think or rethink about kind of what is our world supposed to be post-pandemic now? Is it like what it used to be pre-pandemic, or is it something different?
So I think that's well said. And are we going back to a slower growth rate that we were kind of in pre-pandemic?
Right.
So in other words, as we come off that sugar high of the trillions of dollars that got pumped into the economy and that plays through, as we move through that and we go through this tightening cycle, does that mean, like, coming out of it, we're actually going to have a pretty slow growth environment again for company earnings, company revenues, GDP?
And 2% inflation is that target. That's something that we talk about a lot, Maddie.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure we're going to get all the way back to 2%. I think we probably won't. I do think that the reverse in globalization and onshoring, et cetera, is going to lead to kind of a higher inflation rate going forward as we do more manufacturing, et cetera, here. But I think it can be lower than where it was. Remember, PC was 4.6 in the last print. I think that's coming down.
Yeah.
I think rates are going to stabilize. So while I think the near term is going to be very, very bumpy, especially as we go through earnings season, I think at the end of the year, we could be looking at a much, much better picture for stocks.
Yeah, I wonder if we just look at today, though. I mean, I wonder to what extent it was technically driven a little bit as the S&P drops right below a range, but we also have really weak volume. What does that indicate to you?
I would say if you look inside those numbers, industrial stocks had a pretty tough day today.
Yeah.
So I think we're continuing to see elements of cyclicality in the market get sold off and people moving back towards growth. So I think we are in a trading range. I think they're waiting to see what the Fed does next and what happens with this earnings season. But I think there is a rotation back towards more long duration assets and growth stocks.
It was pretty remarkable. Was it a couple of weeks ago, like pulling out a name like Microsoft or something like these names have really rallied. So add it all up, strategy. What do we do in this environment?
I think right now you still have to be cautious. I do want to get through this earnings season. I do want to see what the Fed does next. I do think, however, though, that this is the time to start to slowly accumulate growth stocks. I think the market's headed towards growth stocks, and I think by the end of the year, you're going to be happy you own them.
I have to ask you this. Do you trust treasuries? Here we thought the ultimate trust investment vehicle, and then to see the problems. And obviously, we're in these interesting times where you saw a Fed that very quickly raised rates. It was a big change within the last 12 months. Are you comfortable with what happened and the exposure?
I think when you were buying treasuries, when they were yielding on the 10-year 75 basis points, you had to be asking yourself what you were doing. Now that they're yielding 335, I feel much better about them. And I do think as the economy slows, dividend-paying stocks and higher-yielding assets are going to start to do better. So I think it's an okay bet right now.
Okay. And just in terms of what happened to the banks, just bad management.
I mean, you got to hedge interest rate risk, right? I mean, that's what happened. They had a mismatch in their assets and their liabilities, and so I don't think people can be surprised when you go through the fastest Fed tightening cycle ever. Let that hurt the banks.
All right. We unfortunately have to leave it there. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Wait, don't leave yet. All right, that's Randy Watts, Chief Investment Strategist at O'Neill Global Advisors here in our Bloomberg Interactive Broker Studio. All right, folks, that is your check and update on the markets and the market close today. Let's get a check on the latest world of national news. Off to Nancy Lyons we go. She's in our 99.1 newsroom in Washington, D.C. Take it away, Nance.
Thanks, Carol. It was a plea of not guilty to 34 charges of falsifying financial records today from former President Donald Trump. But Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg says Trump did direct 3 separate instances of using hush money to cover up alleged affairs. And he says those payments were part of a, quote, conspiracy to undermine the integrity of the 2016 election.
At its core, this case today is one with allegations like so many of our white-collar cases. Allegations that someone lied again and again to protect their interests and evade the laws to which we are all held accountable.
Bragg also says Manhattan is a financial center and it's important to enforce white-collar crimes. Well, former President Trump's attorney, Joe Tacopina, reacted to the charges outside the courtroom.
Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
Tacopina told reporters Trump will not post on social media about the case, and he says he's committed to that. Trump is expected to speak later tonight at his home at Mar-a-Lago. Well, it's a historic day in Europe. Finland has officially joined NATO as the 31st member of the Defense Alliance. Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo reports this would have been unthinkable before Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
This was a shock for Eastern Europe, for the Baltics, for the Nordics, this idea that in 2023, Russia by force could attack a neighbor. This is not something in the past. It's happening right now as we speak in Europe.
Bloomberg's Maria Tadeo reporting from Brussels, where the Finnish flag flies for the first time today at NATO headquarters. Global news 24 hours a day, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Nancy Lyons. Now back to you, Carolyn Madison.
All right. Thank you so much, Nancy Lyons in D.C. Well, you are up to date on World of National News. You're up to date on the financial markets and the close on this Tuesday. We do want to also bring you one of the most read stories. I think it is the most read on the Bloomberg. It has been for most of the day. It's about what we often say is the most listened to voice on Wall Street, Jamie Dimon. He came out with his annual letter to shareholders. So let's get into it with Sally Bakewell. She joins Maddie and me. She is Bloomberg News America's finance team leader. She's here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. Sally, we know it. When Jamie Dimon talks, when he goes to Washington, when he writes something, we all go over it with a fine-tooth comb, right?
Yes, correct. We do.
So what did we get from him today?
I think one of the big takeaways here is his perspective on regulation and how it caused, potentially, a lot of what happened with Silicon Valley Bank. So, by the way, let's note, he has long railed against post-financial crisis regulation. He's called it complex. He's said it harms the country. He's been pretty vociferous about it.
Is he now a fanboy of it?
No, he's not. So that would be
He's still
fantastic. Fantastically interesting. So here today, in his annual letter that is passed out, as you say, by bankers, traders, politicians alike, he said that post-crisis regulation that actually encouraged banks to load up on a lot of these US Treasury bonds that ultimately sort of became their downfall because they saw their value eroded as interest rates rose, and they weren't really prepared or hedged for that. And so we have banks like Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank that were left with these sort of big holes in their balance sheet, and that ultimately led to their demise.
And he was also kind of like everyone was at fault here, right? Like it's the banks themselves, it's regulation, it's the authorities. What was his biggest concern, would you say, on what authorities could do in terms of overreaction? Do we have any specifics from him about his biggest worry there?
Great question. He very much cautioned against any kind of knee-jerk reaction in regulation. And I guess he also doesn't want to see a repeat of the financial crisis where probably in his view that's exactly what they did, and they proposed all these, in his view, again, unnecessary rules that have made things a bit difficult for the banking industry, even though it has also protected them in some regard. So he just said that any regulation that we have now, and there is likely to be some because we know that Biden is looking at increasing scrutiny on banks with 100 billion to 250 billion assets, that we are likely to see heightened and toughened regulation. He said it should just be the right mix of rules that take into consideration things like the bank's insured deposits, their accounting practices, their deposit concentration. I think he just doesn't want a sort of blunt whack-a-mole-like tool.
It's kind of interesting considering we know he went and met with Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen. He is a voice that government officials certainly reach out to. I know there was a lot of speculation. I mean, is he gunning for a position in Washington, perhaps, next Treasury Secretary? I mean, is that something? I don't know.
Again, a great question.
He's been asked it, right?
Yeah, and he did sort of reprise his role from the past financial crisis. By the way, he is the only CEO still in command since the
Which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah, and he has been positioning himself as a kind of elder statesman-like character on the banking and sort of geopolitical and other spheres and stages. So who can say what's on his mind? But he doesn't shy away from being in these roles. And indeed, he and Yellen kind of conjured up this plan, which Dimon sort of took the lead on, to basically rescue one of their smaller peers in First Republic when he sort of galvanized 11 banks to all throw in $30 billion of rescue money to that bank.
Well, in our final 2 minutes with you on this, there were some non-banking things that he talked about. He's talked about AI before, but he brought it up again, right? He also brought up the importance of free market capitalism. What were the things outside of the banking turmoil that he brought up that stood out to you as critical?
Yeah, so I think ChatGPT, AI, were two things that they said that Jamie Dimon said that they are, looking at and using.
He had to say, because every CEO is now saying, but go ahead.
No, exactly that. And, finding ways to use it to fight against fraud, for example. Energy security has been a topic that he talks about a lot, and improving investments into renewable energy to sort of improve energy security was another one. He also brought up succession and pointed to the number of successor candidates that are well known to the board and well known to the community that could replace him if he ever one day, and it's not looking likely, decided to not be JP Morgan's CEO anymore.
Is there a bottom line takeaway? Because you guys, you and your team, covering the banks on Wall Street, covering the finance industry at an interesting time, another time, if you will. How do you kind of put what Jamie Dimon said against the whole industry and how you're thinking about it and thinking about stories and so on and so forth?
Definitely regulation. The unintended consequences therein, I think, is the big takeaway from JP Dimon's letter today.
All right,
Isn't it interesting, Carol, though? We were just talking about how usually when a Jamie Dimon shareholder letter comes out, that's like the big news for a large part of our shows. And look at us today.
Well, and it's interesting because it really did stay atop the most read. I'm just looking. Now it's number 2 in the past 8 hours, and now we have how the markets ended. But it's been a funny day, right, where our focus has been so much on what's been going on in Lower Manhattan, not because the financial sector or the exchanges down there, but because of the former president. Thank you for breaking it down, because we know it's something that our audience really cares about. Sally Bakewell, she's Bloomberg News America's finance team leader, joining us here in our Bloomberg Interactive Brokers studio. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Business Week. Carol Masser along with Maddie Mills. Something that we want to get to and is certainly front and center this week, and that is what's going on with the U.S. workforce, because we get a lot of data points this week.
Yep, we got the job JOLTS report today, I should say, which, as our Bloomberg economics team noted, shows the labor market is unambiguously cooling. And then we've got jobs numbers on Friday as well. So
Right.
a lot to unpack here. With more thoughts, especially when it comes to skills and jobs at the high end of the labor market, we're going to speak with Amelia Tiagi. She is the co-founder and CEO of the Executive Talent Consultant Business Talent Group, which is owned by the executive search and consulting firm Heidrick & Struggles. Amelia is with us on Zoom from Rome. Amelia, thank you so much for joining us. Just for anyone who may not be familiar, can you back up and tell us a little bit about your firm and your clients as well?
Sure, I'm happy to. It's good to be here. And I should say I am visiting Rome. I'm actually based in America. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Business Talent Group, a Heidrick & Struggles company. We provide on-demand talent, interim executives, management consultants, and experts to companies. We have a network of over 20,000, and we're the leader in the U.S.
So what are you seeing in terms of demand for your executives? I mean, give us an idea, give us some color, if you will, how it compares to perhaps a year ago or before that, industries where there's lots of demand or not, geography in terms of variations.
Sure. So we do a study every year tracking the trends that we're seeing across the market. We literally study thousands of inquiries that we hear from all sectors of the economy. We're seeing broad-based growth, and we're actually seeing that as the economy gets choppier and there's more uncertainty out there, that folks are really turning to on-demand solutions because they want that kind of flexibility. They still need to get things done, and they need it fast, but they don't want to necessarily make long-term commitments. The big story, though, is the rise in demand for the interim CFO. We saw demand for an interim CFOs double over the last year. So enormous growth.
What is up with that? Because typically a CFO, and if anything I've learned, coming off the financial crisis, the great financial crisis, is that CFOs were crucial to keeping companies running, making sure those balance sheets were sound and solid and companies had money. Same thing during the pandemic, right? We know that this is an important position. So tell us about why this trend is happening.
You're exactly right. It's a critical position, and I think it's getting harder. I think that's what's happening, is that the CFO's office is under more pressure. And as there's more uncertainty in the economy, we're seeing turnover in the role. There's some burnout among CFOs. There's a lot of companies also that are experiencing changes in what the skills are that they truly need in that role as there's shifts in the economy. So people pull in an interim CFO often when the old CFO goes out. You need somebody in really fast. You can't have any time with that role vacant, especially in this kind of economy.
That's so interesting to me because I've always thought of the type of person to pursue a CFO role as someone who would not want to quit when things get tough and when the economy gets a little bit tighter. So I guess I would not have anticipated that being the type of role where you see a lot of turnover just given some macroeconomic headwinds.
Some of what we're seeing is some skill realignment out there. I think the traditional skills of a CFO, just sort of those financial skills, those are, I think, a ticket to play. And the CFO is increasingly being asked to wear a number of additional hats, especially in this kind of environment. In some situations, they're being asked to raise money. In others, they're asked to manage cash in a whole different way. They're asked to help with restructuring. They may even be asked to assist with big IT projects. It's a lot of hats. And with that skill alignment, I think you're finding, different changes going on in the role. We also find the other trend that's happening behind the scenes. We work with a network of over 20,000 professionals who want to be independent. They've chosen a different path. They don't want to be in a traditional role for 5 or 10 or 20 years. They like going from project to project. There's a lot of people who enjoy that and who are seeking it out. And we're seeing a growth on the talent side as well and changes in what senior level talent really want.
Amelia, give us some insight into the pay that these individuals typically get. And I'm curious, especially if the CFOs in particular, as you're talking about, temporary or otherwise, if they're in demand, how does that work? Is it per project? Is it hourly? Are the individuals ultimately in the driver's seat right now because CFO positions and finance professionals are in demand, as you are saying?
Well, it's a great question, and I do think they're in the driver's seat. They get to pick and choose which projects they work on, and so they work on what they think is most exciting, and they get to pick the people that they want to work with. Typically, pay is structured as pay as you go, and that offers companies total flexibility. So maybe an engagement's going to last for a couple of months. Maybe it gets extended, lasts 6 to 8 months, but you just pay as you go. We tend to see a day rate is most common, but there are variations on that.
Does it change the demographic too for the CFO? I wonder if you're seeing more millennial Gen Zers getting in on a top dog role like the CFO spot.
Well, that's certainly where the trend is going to go over time. We see a lot of mid-career professionals in this today, but definitely where the younger folks are coming over time. We also see where the trend is going is that a lot of the Gen Z and millennials want to work independently. I think they're pushing the envelope on this even faster than the Gen Xers did.
Well, it's interesting you brought up the idea of, these professionals want some balance in their life as well. I want to just full transparency. Your mom is Senator Elizabeth Warren, and she is someone who, talks about things like pay and equity in the system, often talking about executives in the C-suite. Are you finding that for younger finance professionals that it isn't so much about pay, but it is about that balance, and that's what they're prioritizing? And just got about 30 seconds left.
I think people choose to be independent for a range of reasons. Professional control is the #1 reason we hear, although we also hear that they're satisfied financially.
All right, we're going to leave it on that note. Listen, we so appreciate getting some time with you and hearing about your survey. Amelia Taigi, she is, as we said, co-founder and chief executive officer of Business Talent Group, joining us via Zoom, as she said, visiting Rome. She is based in the United States, and her company is owned by, I should say, Heidrick & Struggles, which is a big executive search and consulting firm. So good to get some insight, especially in a week that we know is largely about the U.S. employment force.
Jobs week. It's a big jobs week, and it's just fascinating to see that the challenges in the job market are impacting every level of the company.
No, it's a really good point, especially the finance, which is so important to strategy at many companies. You're listening and watching Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors